Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller, and today I'll take you on a spooky story. But don't worry, it will be a gentle and relaxing journey before you drift off to sleep. If you're looking for a tale that's just mysterious enough and gentle enough to relax to, then you've come to the right place. Now, find yourself a comfortable space, close your eyes, and let the story begin. Story 1. Crying in the Night. I had never believed in ghost stories, but when my group of friends and I arrived in this coastal town, everything seemed to change. We had come to Spain for a week-long trip. It was a beautiful place with cobblestone streets, old houses with red-tiled roofs, and narrow alleys leading to the deep blue ocean. Everything was perfect. Until nightfall. The first night, as we sat on the hotel balcony sipping wine, a strange sound came from the sea. A cry. Soft, distant, echoing in the wind. We immediately looked at each other. James, a friend in the group, chuckled. It must be the wind or someone under the sea. But I wasn't sure. The cry was so clear and sharp that I could feel the pain hidden in it. It didn't sound like some random sound of nature. It was like a wail. I looked out to sea. The water was black, not a boat in sight. I shook my head, trying to shake off the irrational fear in my heart. But then, the waitress from the nearby tavern approached us, her eyes filled with fear. "Don't look out to sea at night." Her voice was so low that I had to lean in to listen. "Why?" I asked. She glanced nervously at the ocean. "If you look too long, she'll look back." A chill ran down my spine. James sneered. "Another folk tale? Some kind of legend to scare tourists?" But the waitress didn't laugh. She stepped back, whispered something in Spanish that I didn't understand, and quickly turned away. I watched her, my heart filled with unease. That night the crying continued, longer, closer, and I started to feel something was watching us. That night I couldn't sleep. The crying continued, now distant, now near, as if it were moving along the shore. I lay on the bed, eyes wide open, listening to every sound that entered the hotel room. Everything was too quiet. I felt like something was wrong. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, I tiptoed out onto the balcony. The sea was dark, with gentle waves lapping against the rocks. The water reflected the silver moonlight, but it wasn't as quiet as I had imagined. In the distance, a figure stood in the middle of the ocean, unmoving. I couldn't breathe. The figure was slender, with long hair and a white dress that fluttered lightly in the sea breeze. But something was wrong. It seemed like the waves weren't touching her. She stood on the water as if the ocean couldn't swallow her. I blinked repeatedly, trying to make sure I wasn't dreaming. And then slowly, she turned around. I froze. She had no face. The darkness was empty where her eyes, her nose, her mouth should have been. There was just a black void, as if a face had been erased from the world. I took a step back, my hands gripping the railing. She was still looking at me, even though she had no eyes. I felt something creeping into my mind. An image flashed through my mind. A girl standing in the middle of the ocean, her arms outstretched, but no one was grasping. A scream echoed in my head, but when I opened my mouth to call out to James, I couldn't make a sound. Just then, a hand landed on my shoulder. I screamed, spinning around. It was James. "What are you doing out here?" His voice was sleepy, but his eyes darkened as he followed my direction. "James, did you see?" She was right there. Nothing. The sea was empty. James stared at me. What the hell are you talking about? I was reeling. She was gone, but I knew. She was still there. And she saw me. I couldn't sleep that night. I tried to convince myself that I was seeing things, that the waves and the moonlight had created a strange illusion, but my heart refused to believe it. I had seen her, and I knew she had seen me. The next morning, I woke up with heavy eyes. James was gone. I checked my phone. It was almost 11 a.m. Had I overslept? I put on my coat and went down to the bar near the hotel, where my friends were sitting. Hey, you look terrible. Sarah raised her eyebrows when she saw me. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to tell her what I'd seen, but I knew no one would believe me. Just insomnia, I muttered, pulling up a chair and sitting down. I looked out at the beach. It was completely normal. There was no sign of anything I'd seen last night. But then I saw something strange. A single footprint in the sand, starting at the water's edge and stretching up the shore, but with no starting point. A chill ran down my spine. Anyone want to go for a walk? I said. Sarah shrugged. Whatever, but I think we should go that way. She pointed toward the bustling neighborhood. No, I want to go to the beach. James frowned. You looked out at the ocean all night last night. What's got you so obsessed? I didn't answer. I just stood up and walked ahead. The beach was normal in the morning. Waves were lapping at the shore. A few locals were strolling. But that single footprint was still there. I followed it, step by step. It led to a patch of wet sand. I bent down, lightly touching the cold sand. Then a whisper sounded right next to my ear. Don't turn around. I froze. The whisper wasn't from my group. It was cold, hollow, as if it came from the sea itself. I didn't dare turn around, but I sensed someone standing right behind me. Everything went silent. No waves, no wind, only an invisible darkness surrounded me. I clenched my fists, telling myself it was just my imagination. Then a hand touched my shoulder. I screamed, turning around. No one. But the footprints in the sand were now two distinct lines leading out to the sea. I stood there, my heart pounding, feeling like I had just crossed an invisible line. And I knew she was still there, watching me. I tried to take a deep breath to calm myself. But something was wrong. The footprints were still in the sand, stretching out to sea, disappearing into the waves. I couldn't take my eyes off them. Are you okay? Sarah put her hand on my shoulder, making me jump. I'm just tired. I tried to force a smile, but Sarah looked at me suspiciously. You don't seem okay. It's not because of last night, is it? I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to talk about the woman standing in the middle of the ocean, faceless. Nor did I want to talk about the shadow I felt behind me. Let's go back to the hotel, James interrupted. You look like you're about to pass out. I nodded, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. I didn't go out on the balcony that night, but that didn't make things any better. The crying came back. This time, it was closer. At first, it was as distant as the day before, but gradually, it became clearer, almost right outside my window. I held my breath. The room became too quiet. I couldn't hear the wind, couldn't hear the waves. There was only the crying. It was no longer echoing from afar, but now right on the other side of the glass door. My heart was pounding. I didn't want to look, but I could feel the presence right outside. And then, knock, knock, knock. Someone was knocking on the balcony glass door. I froze, No one in my group of friends had any reason to joke like that. No one could climb up to the third-floor balcony of a hotel. I didn't dare turn around. Knock, knock, knock. I clutched the blanket tightly, closing my eyes. It's not real. It's not real. Knock! The knocking grew louder. I opened my eyes and looked at the reflection. In the mirror, I saw someone standing outside on the balcony. A woman in a white dress, her long, messy hair covering her face. But in the mirror, she had no face. I choked, my throat tightening. She slowly tilted her head, and then she raised her hand, touching the glass. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone, but the screen suddenly went black. I turned my head to look out the real glass door. No one. But in the mirror, she was still standing there. And this time, I saw her smiling. I jumped up, cold sweat running down my spine. My phone was still off. The room was in heavy darkness. But worse, the crying was still there. It was no longer on the balcony. It was in my room. I gripped the bed sheets, silently retreating to the head of the bed. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel it. The air was cold, as if something was standing right next to me, breathing softly on the back of my neck. I didn't dare turn my head. Everything suddenly became silent. Then I heard a whisper, "Come down here with me." A cold hand touched my shoulder. I screamed and spun around. No one was there, but the mirror opposite the bed still reflected her image. I stepped back, my hand quickly reaching for the phone. The screen flickered for a moment, then turned on. 2:47 a.m. I couldn't be here alone anymore. I rushed out of the room, down the hotel hallway, and knocked on James's door. The door opened immediately. James was standing there, his hair disheveled, his eyes wide. Fuck, I just had a dream. He stopped when he saw my pale face. "You saw her too," I gasped. James didn't answer right away. He looked out into the hallway, as if checking for something. Then he pulled me into the room and slammed the door shut. "I had a dream that we were under the ocean," James said, his voice hoarse. "Something was pulling me under. And when I looked up at the surface, I saw you. But you didn't save me. You just stood there, looking down." I felt a chill run down my spine. I'd seen it in my dreams too, except there was one difference. In my dream, it wasn't James who was being pulled under. It was me. James ran his hand through his hair, breathing heavily. "I don't know what the joke is, but there's something very strange going on in this town. I think we should get out of here." I wanted to agree immediately, but deep down I knew I couldn't leave, not because I didn't want to, but because she wouldn't let me leave. James and I couldn't sleep that night. We both sat against the wall, staring out the hotel window. Neither of us dared to say anything about what we'd seen. The girl in the sea, the dream of being dragged underwater, and the nightly cries that echoed out to sea. I looked at my watch. 5:23 a.m. Dawn was starting to creep in through the crack in the door, but the fear hadn't left my chest. "Do you remember the barmaid?" I asked softly. James nodded. "She warned us. I think we should find her. Maybe she knows something." James was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "Okay, but if we don't find out, I'm booking a ticket out of town." I didn't blame him. I wanted to leave too, but I knew she wouldn't let me go that easily. We arrived at the tavern. As the sun was rising, the sky was blue, the waves lapping gently against the sand. If it weren't for what had happened, I might have thought it was just another ordinary morning. We entered the small seaside tavern. The air still smelled of salt and damp wood. The waitress from the day before was wiping down a table in the corner. She saw us, and immediately her face paled. "You looked out to sea, didn't you?" Her voice was trembling. James and I looked at each other, and I nodded. She slammed the towel down on the table, walked quickly over, and whispered urgently, "You have to leave this place immediately. She saw you. She won't leave you alone." My heart sank. "Who is she?" I asked. The waitress glanced away, as if afraid someone might hear. Then she pulled us into the darkest corner of the tavern, her voice almost a whisper. She was a woman who lived in this town decades ago. But one night, she disappeared at sea. Her white dress was found washed ashore, but no one ever found her body. James swallowed. And then, the waitress looked deep into our eyes. Every night, she comes back, standing in the middle of the sea, crying, calling for someone. Anyone who sees her never leaves this town again. A chill ran down my spine. "Has she haunted anyone before?" I asked, my voice fading. The waitress pursed her lips, then pointed out the window. We watched. An old man sat on a bench, staring blankly out at the sea. He was the last person to see her. And now, he doesn't talk to anyone. The waitress whispered. His mind is no longer his own. James took a step back. It can't be. I clenched my fists, took a deep breath. I have to talk to him. James looked at me like I was crazy. "Are you crazy? I don't want you to end up like him." But I knew this was the only way to understand what was happening. So I stepped outside, toward the old man. And as I got closer, he slowly turned his head. His eyes were completely white. I stood frozen before the old man's lifeless gaze. His white eye sockets stared right through me as if I were no longer a person, but just another entity caught between this world and the next. My heart pounded in my chest. James stood behind me, holding his breath. "Did you hear the crying?" I asked, my voice as small as a breath. The old man blinked slowly, as if the words had awakened some forgotten part of his memory. Then he smiled. A crooked, dry smile, devoid of any warmth. "It's not crying anymore." His voice was hoarse, as if his throat had long since dried up. "Now," she whispers. A chill ran down my spine. James squeezed my hand. "I think we should go." But I couldn't turn away. "What is she whispering?" I asked. The old man was still for a few seconds. Then his mouth moved, repeating inarticulate words. I strained to listen. And then I heard it. A voice rang out right next to my ear. "Come down here with me." I jerked, turning around. There was no one, but I felt cold breath right on my neck. James panicked and pulled me away from the old man. "Let's go." But the old man suddenly grabbed my wrist with terrifying force. "You heard her, didn't you?" he whispered. I couldn't answer. His hand was as cold as ice. And when I tried to pull away, I noticed that his fingernails had turned a grayish black, as if they had been corroded by the sea. James yanked me away from him. "Enough. We can't stay here." We ran away from the beach, the old man's raucous laughter following us. We returned to the hotel, but the fear did not leave us. I stood in front of the mirror in my room, staring at my pale face. "Come down here with me." I heard it. She was calling me. I could not leave again. Not because I did not want to, but because I could not. Story 2. The haunted school Boston University is famous not only for its quality of teaching, but also for the mysterious stories surrounding its old campus. One early morning, my friends and I walked into class, still hungover from last night. The weekend night, when we all decided to explore the campus together. We were freshmen, newly arrived at the school, with hopes and dreams that had yet to be formed. But there was one thing. This school was not all light and joy. Here, there were also shadows that we did not know about until we accidentally discovered them. My name is Ethan, and this is my story. A story that none of us could explain. A story that made us never dare to set foot on this school again. That day, after class ended, our group gathered near a small cafe on campus. Everyone was chatting excitedly about upcoming assignments, and I paid no attention until Chris, my best friend, stood up and pointed toward a remote hallway in the distance. "Look," Chris said, his eyes lighten up as if he'd just spotted something interesting. "That door. Have you ever seen it?" I looked in the direction he was pointing. It was an old wooden door, almost hidden by dust and overgrown vines. It wasn't on any of the school's maps. It certainly didn't exist on the campus map. "That's weird. I've never seen that door," I said, but I wasn't too surprised. The university was huge, with lots of areas I'd never been to. But curiosity drew us closer. As we got closer, I felt a strange chill, as if the air around me had suddenly become heavy. The door, though old, showed no signs of damage. Chris tried to open it but couldn't. "It's locked," he said, looking disappointed, but his eyes still sparkled with curiosity. "Let's try to find a way in," Lena, one of the girls in the group, suggested. "Maybe there's something interesting behind it." Without saying anything, we started searching around the door, like curious children trying to find a hidden secret. After a while, Jack discovered a small crack in the wall near the door. "It looks like an old crack. Maybe this door has been opened before." The decision was made quickly. After a while of searching for tools, we used a hammer and gently chiseled into the crack. The door opened with a creak, as if no one had touched it for a long time. At that moment, I felt a cold wind hit my face, making me shiver. The door opened, and behind it was a dark space. We looked at each other. No one said anything, just stood there in silence. Lena stepped in first, softly saying, "Let's try it out." The inside of that room was unlike any other room on campus. It was a small space, the walls covered with green moss. The dim light from the small windows shone in weakly. Everything here seemed to have been forgotten for a long time. The air was heavy, as if something was pressing down, silent and scary. "What happened here?" I asked myself, following Lena in, feeling like something was wrong. We walked deeper into the room. Each step seemed a little heavier. Then a sudden noise rang out, causing us all to turn around in surprise. A small wooden door at the end of the room suddenly slammed shut, even though we had not seen anyone there before. "How is this possible?" Chris asked, his face bewildered. "There's definitely someone in here," Jack said, but I could tell he didn't sound as confident as before. Lena approached the door, carefully opening it, but inside was only darkness. We couldn't see anything clearly, only vague shadows. At that moment, another cold air swept through the room. The window curtains fluttered, and we heard strange sounds, like sighs from deep in the darkness. I began to feel the presence of something inexplicable, as if someone were watching us. Everything around us seemed to be changing, as if time and space were no longer solid things. Lena stood up, turning to look at us with a hazy gaze. We should go outside. But when we turned back, the door was gone. Not closed, but completely gone from where it had been. There was only a blank wall left. At this point, fear began to slowly rise in me. Lena, Chris, Jack and I all looked at each other in utter confusion. No one said anything, but in the back of our minds, we all knew that something very strange was happening. We couldn't understand it, but we felt one thing. We were trapped in something. Something that wasn't part of this world. The space around us seemed to change, as if other doors were opening, but we couldn't see them. And that night, we couldn't escape the feeling that there was some force watching our every move, waiting. We stood there, staring blankly at the empty wall where the door had been just a minute ago. A cold gust of air suddenly rushed in from somewhere, making us all shiver. Lena was the first to speak, though her voice was trembling slightly. "What's going on? Are we lost?" Chris turned around, trying to regain his composure. "No, it can't be. The door was just here. I saw it clearly." He continued to look back into the space, his eyes filled with confusion. Jack shook his head, grabbed Lena's hand and pulled her toward the corner of the room. "Don't stand here. Something's wrong. I can't explain it, but this feels strange." A heavy feeling clung to us, as if the space in this room was suffocating our breath. Everything became quiet, but strangely, the space seemed to be swaying. I looked towards the small window, where the dim light from outside was shining in. But the darkness seemed to spread, swallowing everything. I walked towards the window, hoping that some light could help me escape the feeling of panic rising inside me. When I pushed the curtains aside, something strange happened. The light no longer shone into the room. Instead, there was a large, dark shadow, like a dark cloud, covering everything. A feeling of death enveloped me, and I suddenly felt like someone was staring at me, watching my every move. Lana gently tugged on my hand. "Ethan, we have to leave now. I can't take it anymore." But I couldn't leave. Something had changed. Something I couldn't explain. I looked at my friends. They all looked uneasy, but they all couldn't move, as if held back by an invisible force. Suddenly, a scream rang out in the silence, not from any of us. A scream that came from somewhere far away in this room. It was not the scream of a living person. It was the scream of someone long dead. My group turned around, eyes wide with fear. A blurry figure suddenly appeared in the corner of the room, where there had been nothing before. The figure looked like a person, but it was not a person. The face was blurry. Only the eyes were glowing, staring straight at us, making us unable to look away. Chris, now pale, took a step back. "We have to go now." But as he turned to run, a strange sound came from the window. It was not the wind or any normal noise, but a hissing sound, as if someone was whispering right next to his ear. "Don't run. Don't leave." I turned to look. The figure remained there, unmoving, but it seemed to be moving closer, slowly approaching us. We couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at it, as if its power had absorbed all our attention and will. And then, the space in this room began to change. The walls around us seemed to begin to shrink, pressing us closer together. The room became smaller and smaller, as if we were trapped in a giant trap. Everything seemed to become blurry and hard to define. I felt like I was falling into a strange dream, a nightmare from which I couldn't escape. Lena exclaimed, "We can't get out of here. This is a trap." Chris turned around, his eyes shining with a faint hope. Maybe we can find a way out. This room, it can change. But if it can change, we can get out. I tried to concentrate, but the tension in my heart would not go away. The feeling of fear was about to burst. "But what if we find a way out, and this room doesn't want us to go?" I asked, my voice hoarse. There was no answer. Lena suddenly jumped, her hands gripping me. "Ethan, look." I turned around and saw not one but 1,000 figures standing around us, all without clear faces. They stood still, but their eyes were glowing, red, like 1,000 lamps burning in the darkness. A feeling of panic and despair enveloped us. All hope was gone, as if we had been sent into an endless loop. And then I realized something. We weren't just trapped in this room. We were trapped in the past of this school, a past that has now become part of a monstrous evil, waiting to devour all who dare enter. When I woke up, the space around me had changed. I wasn't sure if I'd fallen asleep or just drifted off into a haunting dream, but I noticed one thing. There was no one beside me. Lena, Chris, and Jack were all gone. In this room, it was just me, and the darkness was getting thicker. Everything around me was hazy, as if space was no longer a fixed entity. I could no longer hear my own breathing. The whole room was strangely quiet. I stood up, my feet feeling heavy, as if I was walking in a swamp. When I took a few steps, it felt as if my footsteps left no trace. Not because I walked lightly, but because the space around me seemed to swallow all sound. Then I heard it, a small sound, like the sound of shoes on an old wooden floor. But it wasn't coming from me. I turned around, my heart pounding in my chest. But apart from me, there was no one. The shadows around me seemed to be moving. Maybe it was the dim light from the window, or maybe it was something invisible following me. I don't know why, but a feeling grew stronger and stronger. I wasn't alone. Someone was still here, but they couldn't see me, just like I couldn't see them. I continued walking, each step becoming more difficult. A heavy feeling seemed to invade my body, as if this space was trying to force me into a corner, separating me from reality. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the end of the hallway outside the room. That shadowy figure seemed to have no clear shape, but I could feel it moving towards me like something uncontrollable. I felt my blood freeze, my heart pounded, and I couldn't move. "Ethan." A soft voice, like a whisper, but with an unusual power. The voice seemed to penetrate my brain, making me feel the sharp pain. "Ethan, run." I turned around, but saw no one. The room was still dark, and the shadows seemed to have disappeared. Everything became quiet again, but this silence made me even more confused. Something was staring at me. Someone was still watching me, and there was nothing I could do to escape that surveillance. I began to panic, and then I heard a strange sound, like a whisper coming from behind. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I realized that the sound was like the whispers of the souls trapped in this room. There's no escape. Run, but there's nowhere to go. A feeling of being trapped, unable to escape, enveloped me. I looked around, but saw only a dark, gloomy space. The group was gone, and now I felt as if I were lost in a maze with no way out. Suddenly, the room began to change again. The walls around me seemed to be undulating, distorting. And then I found myself standing in another room. A room that looked like a classroom, but wasn't. Empty desks, lifeless chairs, all covered in thick dust. But I could feel something strange. Those chairs seemed to be moving, even though no one was sitting there. A figure appeared again. This time, I recognized it as Lena. Lena stood there, looking at me with a blank, emotionless gaze. She didn't say anything, just stood there silently, as if frozen in that moment. I rushed towards her, but as I got closer, Lena suddenly disappeared, like a mirage, leaving only empty space. "Lena!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the cold space. But there was no answer. I looked around, and suddenly, a large black shadow appeared in front of me, as if from within the wall. It was a strange shape, faceless, eyeless, only a blurry silhouette. A laugh rang out in the space. It was a cold laugh, not from a living person, but from some entity that I could not understand. "This place will be your home. You are too late." I felt like I was frozen. The space around me seemed to be imprisoned, and I could not move. This feeling was like a nightmare from which I could not escape. I saw Lena again, but this time, she was not herself. She was a ghost, a soul separated from her body, looking at me with empty eyes. "Stay here," Lena whispered, her voice a tearing sound. "Because you'll never leave." The walls began to ripple again, and I realized that this room, this place I was standing in, wasn't a real place. It was a never-ending nightmare. These shadows, these whispers, were all leading me into something I couldn't escape. "No, not like this," I stammered, feeling like I was losing all hope. It was too late. Story 3. Nameless Footsteps in the Church. The rain continued to fall, each heavy raindrop hitting the window glass, creating an endless rattling sound. In the dormitory room, the group of students sat silently, the warm yellow light of the desk lamp shining on the open books. Each lifeless line of text could not dispel the tension that filled the space. At that time, I, Jason, sat at the corner of the table, looking at the pile of documents about the old church. The story of the horrific massacre that happened there had attracted our group's attention all week. This church, located deep in the desolate mountains of North America, had witnessed a tragedy that no one could explain. 13 people died that night, all showing signs of torture before death. But no one knew who killed them. The police found their bodies the next morning, with no wounds on their bodies, only panicked expressions on their faces, as if they had been tortured by something invisible. My group had decided to choose this church as the target for our strange research project. We were third-year students majoring in folklore and paranormal history, and this was the perfect opportunity to prove the existence of supernatural phenomena. The group fell silent. I could hear my heart pounding, my thoughts wandering about the upcoming trip. At this point, I still couldn't fully grasp the danger we were about to face. Researching an abandoned church was strange enough, but hearing the folk tales about this church, I began to feel that something was wrong. "It's time," Chloe, one of my close friends, said. "We have to get ready to go." The group looked at each other, each of us seemingly sensing the tension in the air. Chloe, Lily, Max, and I 4 of us were students in the same class. Chloe was the most active of the group, always making decisions and encouraging us to go all the way. Lily was quiet, but always curious about mysterious things. Max, a friend who was passionate about researching paranormal phenomena, was the one who found out about this church and convinced us to join. Our car rolled on the deserted road, the headlights illuminating the dim space. All around was thick darkness and the sound of falling rain. The deeper we went into the forest, the more I felt the surrounding space seemed to gradually become heavier. At first, I didn't notice, but as I drove past abandoned houses, tall lampposts damaged by wind and rain, I began to feel the coldness in the air. It felt like there was an invisible presence watching us, and a vague fear rose in my heart. "There's definitely nothing to worry about. It's just an old church," Max spoke, breaking the long silence. He tried to sound confident, but I could tell his eyes were still darting out the window, as if searching for some reason to reassure himself. Chloe turned around, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "What about you, Jason? Are you nervous?" I just smiled, though I was a little nervous too. I guessed nothing. Finally, we reached the old church. It was a desolate, crumbling site, with cracked stone walls and a jagged roof. Trees grew all around, and the stained glass in the windows was shattered, casting strange shadows on the ground. The main door was wide open, as if inviting us in. Max was the first to step onto the steps, the flashlight in his hand illuminating the moss-covered steps. "Here we are," he said, his voice echoing in the quiet. "We'll find something interesting here." Inside the church, everything was eerily silent. A deathly silence hung in the air, no footsteps, no wind. The group moved silently, flashlight beams tracing the dark walls, the abandoned pews, and the faded details of the old tapestries. It felt as if the church hadn't seen life in years. Lily was the first to sense that something was wrong. "Do you hear anything?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't hear anything, but the worry in Lily's eyes made me tense. The group stopped, listening in silence. There was no sound. But then, from somewhere in the church, a soft whispering sound rang out. I couldn't pinpoint its source, but the sound made me feel like something was watching us. Chloe put her hand to her chest, trying to calm herself. "It must be the wind." I wanted to believe it, but the feeling inside me was not the wind. Something had begun to change, and I could feel this invisible presence, as if it were watching our every move. And then, something in the darkness, where the light could not reach, moved. Max's voice rang out, lost in the silence. "Let's go find the underground bunker. There might be some clues there." We continued to move through the dark hallways of the church, each step a sigh in the suffocating silence. Our flashlights illuminated the walls, the cracks forming strange shapes, and I couldn't help but think of the stories we'd heard about this house. Trapped souls, ghosts who couldn't find their way to the next level. "We need to search quickly," Max said, his voice lacking confidence, though he tried to hide it. "This place doesn't seem right." I said nothing, just nodded. Whatever it was, I couldn't deny the fear that was rising in my heart, but I didn't want to show it in front of the group. I looked at Lily, who was standing near the broken window, her eyes distant, as if she was seeing something I couldn't see. "Chloe," I called softly, "are you sure we should continue? This isn't what we thought it would be. Chloe stood silently, head bowed in thought. She was always the most optimistic of the group, but this time it didn't seem so. "We're here. Let's get this over with," she said. But her voice sounded more fragile, more vulnerable than usual. We continued deeper inside, past rows of dilapidated tables and chairs, along walls marked by time. In a hidden corner of the church, I noticed a small, old, locked door. A door that wasn't on the map of the church we had. "I bet no one comes here," Max said as he approached the door. "There might be something valuable in there." "Shouldn't we try?" Lily exclaimed, her eyes shining with curiosity. I don't know why, but a strange sense of unease welled up inside me. There was something wrong with this door, a shadowy presence behind it that I couldn't quite place. But we were here, and we had come too far to turn back. Max quickly used a large nail to try to break the door open. A dry sound rang out as the door was pulled open. The air inside was suffocatingly quiet, making me feel like I was entering another space. The room inside was dark, only a few weak rays of light coming from the cracks in the wall. It was a small, narrow space with rotten wooden tables and old, dusty objects. The smell of mold and rotten wood permeated the air, making me feel suffocated. I walked in after Max, but suddenly a soft sigh sounded from the dark corner of the room. I stopped, my eyes darting around. The group was silent, the only sound being the rain outside. "It must be the wind," Chloe said, trying to calm herself, but there was a tremor in her voice. A cold wind blew past me, carrying with it the feeling that someone was standing right behind me. I turned around, but saw nothing. Max continued on, not noticing the change in the air. I suddenly noticed that the light from his flashlight was flickering strangely. Max walked to an old wooden tea table in the corner of the room, stopping. "Hey, I found something," he said with interest, but then, as he lifted up a thin notebook, I saw his eyes become hazy. Another coldness passed over me. This feeling was not the curiosity of a normal search. Did you see anything?" Max asked, his eyes lost. The group turned to look. In the old notebook, the words were faded, but still legible. I moved closer, and what I read took my breath away. It was strange writing, not English, but like ancient curses. One last sentence appeared clearly, making me shiver. "They will come at midnight." Lily stepped back, her face pale. "Jason, do you see anything?" she asked, her voice trembling. I turned around, and this time, I saw a blurry figure, standing right in the corner of the room. It was a human figure, faint as a mist, standing silently watching us. I opened my mouth to call out but couldn't utter a word. Max still didn't notice. He had already started to turn the next pages of the book. Suddenly, a sound like the sound of shoes moving came from behind. My eyes couldn't take their eyes off the figure. I knew I had to do something, but my body was frozen, unable to move. Lily pulled me back, her voice almost screaming, "Run, Jason, run!" But when I turned to look at Max, I saw him standing there, his mouth open, but no sound came out. His eyes were wide open, lifeless. The group, Lily and I, only had time to turn and run. By the time we left the room, the sigh echoed in the church again. A sound that cut into my mind, one I could never forget. We ran out of the room, my heart heavy with confusion and fear. Lily's steps were like the wind, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from Max. He stood there, still like a ghost, his eyes wide and empty. I couldn't explain his condition, but one thing was certain. He was no longer the Max we knew. Run? Lily pulled me back. Her voice panicked, but my feet felt rooted to the wooden floor, unable to lift. You didn't see anything? I could barely get the question out, my mind spinning, unable to believe what my eyes were seeing. Lily turned to look at me, her eyes full of concern. There's no time to think, Jason. We have to get out of here. She gasped, then dragged me toward the front door. At this moment, those sighs rang out again, not from a certain place, but from all over the church. The sighs sounded like thousands of people were groaning, screaming from deep in the darkness. The sound became dense, as if it was spreading throughout the space. We continued running. My steps seemed to no longer be my own. My legs felt like lead, each step a challenge. I turned back, not out of curiosity, but because I felt like something was chasing me. There was definitely something. I could feel its cold gaze following us. Lily still pulled me along, her face no longer as calm as before. Don't turn back, Jason. Don't turn back. We ran through the dark corridors, each step making a loud echo in the empty space. Suddenly, a figure jumped out from the corner behind us. I heard footsteps, a loud noise, as if someone was chasing me. But when I turned around, I saw only pitch darkness, nothing but broken glass and old objects. What is it? I asked in panic, my voice hoarse with fear. Lily didn't answer. She just ran faster, and I had no choice but to continue chasing. Suddenly, we stopped in front of the main door of the church. But when I looked outside, I saw only pitch-black darkness, no stars, only pouring rain, and the humid air made my every move feel like a burden. The door. Why is it closed? Lily exclaimed. I looked at the large wooden door, which seemed to be normal, but when I approached and tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. Every time I tried again, the door seemed heavier, as if an invisible force was holding it down. It can't be, I whispered. It can't be. Then I realized something was strange. Our footsteps had long since fallen silent, no longer echoing like before. But perhaps the silence I felt wasn't a normal silence. It felt as if something was surrounding us, waiting, as if we were surrounded by an invisible space. Lily turned around, her face pale. Are we trapped? I looked at her, my eyes clouded with fear. But I had to do something. I started to twist the door again, but still couldn't open it. The feeling of dread inside me seemed to rise fiercely. Something in this church wasn't right. It wasn't just holding us back. It wanted us to stay forever. We have to find another way. We have to find a way out, I said, my voice low. Lily nodded, but I knew panic was slowly taking over her. She turned back, looking into the endless corridors of the church. The darkness that seemed to surround us. It felt like there were invisible eyes watching, following our every step, which made us panic even more. We decided to turn back, entering a new corridor that we had not tried. The deeper we went inside, the more suffocating the space became. The cold and the eerie silence enveloped us. The space seemed to twist. The darkness became thicker, and our steps became more and more difficult. But when we reached the end of the corridor, a sight that I could not believe my eyes. In front was a small door, not like normal doors. There were strange marks on the door, human carvings, dried blood, and faint traces of hands, as if someone had drawn on it a long time ago. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. but I couldn't stop staring. Lily stood still, not daring to move forward. Jason, what do you think? Something's wrong. We have to go in there, I said, but my voice was broken. We have no choice. And as I opened the door, a cold wind blew past my face, making me shiver. The door opened into a dark space where shadows floated, as if thousands of eyes were watching us from the darkness. No, it can't be, Lily said, and she backed away, her eyes wide with horror. But I couldn't turn back, because I knew if we didn't face this, we would never get out. Story 4. Trapped in the Dark, The Mystery Man. The Mitchell family had just moved into an old house in a quiet suburb of New England. The 3-story house had a rustic, simple appearance, but it was strangely difficult to explain. The scenery around this area had a quiet, time-forgotten look. But the houses in this area, especially the Mitchell family's house, carried an undeniable mystery. The cracked walls and opaque windows gave everyone the feeling that this house was hiding stories that no one wanted to know. The first week passed peacefully. The Mitchell family seemed to have gotten used to the quiet atmosphere of this area. But then, on the second night, everything began to change. That night after dinner, the whole family sat together in the dining room, the warm light shining on familiar faces. Laughter and chatter made the atmosphere intimate, but that peaceful feeling was suddenly torn apart by a knock on the door. Immediately, all eyes in the room turned to the main door. A feeling of anxiety and heaviness began to fill the space. Andrew Mitchell, the husband, stood up and walked towards the door. The strange feeling in his heart made him unable to imagine what was waiting outside. When he opened the door, in front of him was a strange man, tall, with a haggard face and eyes that seemed to penetrate everything. He was wearing old clothes, the style of the 1940s, but the strange thing was that everything on him seemed to not belong to this time. "Excuse me, can I come in for a moment?" The man's voice rang out warmly but coldly. Andrew hesitated for a moment, looked at the man for a long time, then shook his head slightly. "I don't know who you are. We can't receive guests at this time." But the man did not retreat. He just stood there, his eyes still fixed on Andrew, as if looking for some kind of approval. He continued, his voice unchanged. "I know everything about you, about your family." Hearing that, Andrew was startled. What did he know about his family? How could a stranger know such intimate things? For a moment, Andrew felt trapped by that gaze. The man's eyes seemed to have a strange attraction, making him unable to look away. Finally, he quickly closed the door and turned inside, trying to hide the confusion in his heart. Everything then became strangely quiet, to the point that the family did not dare to speak. That night, they could not sleep. Strange noises rang out from the corners of the house, from above the ceiling, from under the floor, as if someone was moving in the dark. Every time they heard footsteps, the Mitchell family held their breath, waiting nervously. But when they opened the door, there was no one. The next day, Elizabeth, Andrew's wife, decided to go out to familiarize herself with the area around the house. When she returned, a feeling of unease rose in her heart when she saw faint handprints on the main door, as if someone had touched it long ago, leaving traces of a strange presence. Elizabeth said nothing, but a fear began to rise in her heart. Those handprints were identical to the ones she had seen in an old book she had accidentally found in a corner of the bookcase when she first moved in. It was a story about the Larson family, who had lived in this house before. The Larson family, like the Mitchell family, had moved her in the hope of finding a safe place. But just a few months later, they mysteriously disappeared, leaving no trace. Everyone in the area assumed that they had left suddenly. But according to the stories from the survivors around, the truth might not be that simple. One of the Lawsons' old neighbors, a woman named Helen, was the only survivor of the strange event. Although she no longer lived in the area, when she met Elizabeth, she told her the story she had never forgotten. "They had that man too," Helen said, her eyes fixed on Elizabeth, her voice hoarse as if still haunted. "That uninvited guest, a man, he knocked on the door one dark night, said he knew everything about their family. And then, they never saw the Larsons again. Everything was gone, leaving only strange traces. That man was a spirit, something not of this world." Elizabeth shuddered as she heard the story, a fear starting to spread through her. She didn't want to believe the strange story, but everything she had experienced seemed to be leading her to an undeniable truth. Strange phenomena, the appearance of a strange man, and mysterious marks on the door. Everything seems to be no coincidence. The Mitchell family now has to face not only strange supernatural phenomena, but also an invisible danger, something that is silently invading their lives, step by step, minute by minute. They began to realize that the man was not just a stranger, but a trapped spirit, an entity that no one in the family could easily escape. What they were facing was not just a real person, but a dark thing from the other world. If they did not quickly find a way to exorcise him, they might become the next victims in the dark game of lost souls. An uneasy feeling pervades the house. Every night, a battle against the strange emotions that are creeping into every corner of the Mitchell family's mind. Although they tried to maintain peace in the early days of moving in, once night fell, this house became a living thing, full of strange noises, shadowy figures, and inexplicable things. Andrew Mitchell clearly felt the presence of something dark, a heavy silence, as if something was silently waiting. He was still haunted by that night, when the strange man knocked on the door and said strange things about their family, about things that no one in the family could know. One morning, while the family was eating breakfast, Andrew could not sit still. The questions in his head kept spinning without answers. He decided to go down to the basement of the house, which was said to contain many strange and mysterious things from the families who had lived here. The hallway leading down to the basement was dark. The wooden walls were mossy. The smell of dampness gradually enveloped him as his footsteps became heavier. The basement of the house was not like the normal basements that Andrew had seen in other houses. It was stuffy, full of old furniture, as if time had stopped here for a long time. The wooden boxes were rotten, the tables and chairs were covered in dust, and the space was filled with a cold, gloomy feeling. Andrew could not help but feel that he was in a place not meant for living people. But he did not stop. He continued walking, looking for any trace that could help him explain the strange things that had happened since they moved here. Among the old furniture, Andrew found a large wooden cabinet, moldy and covered in dust. This cabinet did not seem to be an ordinary item. Made of hardwood, with deep cracks, like scratches on an old painting. He carefully opened the cabinet door, and to his surprise, it did not smell of rotten wood, but rather a strange smell, like the smell of burnt paper. Unpleasant, but very recognizable. Inside the cabinet were a pile of papers and old paintings. Some of the photos were yellowed. Some of the old notebooks were eaten by termites. Andrew flipped through the notebooks quickly. But what he was looking for was not the faded lines, but the traces of the Lawson family. The family that had lived here before them. A photo suddenly fell out of one of the notebooks. It was a black and white picture of a man. His face very familiar. It was the strange man Andrew had met that night. He was standing in the middle of a crowd at a party that seemed to be taking place in this very house. In the photo, there were a few people looking into the lens, while others seemed to not see the camera. However, the strange thing was that there was one woman in the photo who had a very different look in her eyes. Her eyes were burning like fire, while the others were completely normal. Andrew felt a chill down his spine, as if something in the photo was trying to tell him something. He continued to flip through the other photos and found an old diary. The pages were discolored, but still had the original handwriting. The first pages were just normal notes about the Lawson family's daily life. But when he reached the third page, the words started to become strange. There was a knock on the door every night, always at 10 o'clock. We didn't dare open the door anymore. That man, he came, but he never spoke to us. He just stood there, staring through the window. Neither Edward nor I dared to sleep anymore. We felt like he was watching our every move. Today, he came into the house. There was no sound, no warning, just a shadow that passed through the door. He said he knew everything about us. I felt like there was a force pulling us into a world we couldn't escape. Turning to the last page, Andrew felt like he was suffocating. The last paragraph of the diary was no longer like normal writing. The writing was distorted, strange, as if someone had written it in a panic. I heard whispers from the living room. We had nowhere to go. I saw him standing there. He was waiting, and we couldn't run away anymore. The last words left Andrew unable to stand. He quickly closed the diary, but in his mind, the image of the strange man became clearer. Who was he? And why did he appear in all the Lawson family's memories? As Andrew turned to leave the basement, he suddenly felt a faint light flashing in the dark corner of the room. That light was like a lamp from the past, waiting to lead him into another world. That dark shadow, the man he had met, was still silently watching him. Andrew's footsteps seemed to be pulled back by an invisible force. He turned around and saw the shadow of the man in the old mirror placed in the corner of the room. But this time, it wasn't a strange man. It was the shadow of a woman, her eyes empty and pained, staring at him. The air in the basement suddenly became suffocating. An inexplicable feeling, as if thousands of eyes were watching him from all directions. He had arrived, and Andrew realized that everything had only just begun. Andrew couldn't believe what he had just witnessed in the basement. The shadow of the woman, those pained and empty eyes, was still imprinted in his mind, as if it was haunting his every thought. He tried to turn around, not to look at the mirror anymore, But as he walked through the basement door, a strange sound rang out right behind him. It was a soft whisper, as if someone was calling his name from the darkness. He turned around, but saw nothing but the quiet, cold space. The feeling of fear from the basement kept rising in waves, wave after wave. Andrew couldn't stop. He felt like he couldn't breathe, as if the air in this house had been made heavier by some force, as if someone was watching his every step. When he reached the first floor, everything seemed to be different. This house, which had been full of furniture before, now seemed to have changed. The paintings on the walls were turned upside down, and the light from the lamps seemed not to be enough to dispel the gloom in the living room. Just then, the knocking sounded again, not as gentle as before, but strong, as if an invisible hand was pounding on the door. Elizabeth was sitting in the living room with the two children. She did not meet Andrew's eyes when he entered. The reason was not because she did not recognize him, but because she had sensed something that Andrew could not understand. Elizabeth looked up at him, her eyes dark and worried. "Andrew, something is wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "Can't you see? Can't you feel anything?" Andrew turned around, but everything was normal. There was no one, no sound. Only that suffocating feeling still lingered in the air. The knocking sounded again. This time it was stronger, as if someone was screaming from outside. Andrew felt like he couldn't stand any longer, but he couldn't leave, couldn't run. He could feel the strange man's eyes watching him from somewhere in the darkness. "He's here again," Elizabeth whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "He won't let us go, Andrew. He's been coming for us for a long time." Andrew looked at his wife, feeling like she was saying something he couldn't understand. But her fearful eyes made him feel like something terrible was about to happen. Suddenly, the front door opened again, without a sound. The entire Mitchell family couldn't believe their eyes when they saw the strange man walk in. His face as cold as ever. The light from outside the door streamed in, but he didn't reveal a shadow. Only his eyes, those eyes, glowed a fiery red, as if looking into their souls. "Welcome to my home," he said, his voice even but powerful. "What?" Andrew shouted, unable to keep his composure. "Who invited you in?" The man smiled coldly. "You didn't have to invite me. I just came to see if you had the courage to face the truth." The Mitchell family stood still, not daring to move. Their gasps mingled with the silence, but even the smallest sounds seemed to be sucked into the darkness around them. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered and went out. The living room was dark, save for the dim light from the door. A shadowy figure passed by, like an elusive shadow. "Don't be afraid, Elizabeth," the man spoke, his voice soft, but as if he had lived for centuries. "I only want to help you understand your family better. What you're facing is no accident." Elizabeth looked at the stranger, her face tense. "You? Who are you? Why did you do this to us?" He smiled coldly. "I am the one you have forgotten. I am Edward Caldwell, who lived in this house before you. You are not the first to come here, and you will not be the last. Every generation of this family has paid for what happened in the past." Andrew was shocked to hear that name. Edward Caldwell, the name he had found in the documents in the basement. This man, he was the spirit trapped in this house, and he had no intention of leaving. "My family! We want nothing to do with this past," Andrew cried out. But as soon as he said these words, the light in the room went out, and everything was plunged into pitch black darkness. A soft laugh echoed through the air, a laugh that seemed to come from far away, as if it came from the ground. Andrew felt every step he took as he approached. The coldness of the man's hand made it hard for him to breathe. Suddenly, another voice spoke from the darkness. A woman's voice. "Don't let him take you away. If you don't want to meet our fate, you must leave before it's too late." The voice echoed throughout the house, as if it had come from a very faraway place, a long time ago. It was the voice of the woman Andrew had seen in the old photo in the basement. It was not a living person. The room was shrouded in darkness, and Andrew felt a sense of panic he had never felt before. At this moment, everything became clearer than ever. The Mitchell family was dealing with more than just a simple spirit. They are facing the curse of an invisible force, trying to pull them into a world they can never escape. And it is then that Andrew knows that a terrible war is beginning. A war they cannot win unless they find a way to confront the evil that reigns in this house. Story 5. The Haunted Apartment. Sleepless Nights. I moved into this apartment in late autumn when the weather started to get cold, and the wind blowing through the cracks in the door made the air even more gloomy. The apartment was located in the suburbs, far from the city center, where most of the buildings were old and dilapidated, and no one seemed to care about them anymore. But it also had a strange charm that I couldn't resist. Absolute quiet. From the first time I stepped in here, I felt like I could find a little peace in the hustle and bustle of life. This apartment was not a large place, with only a living room, a bedroom, and a small kitchen. The walls were pale yellow, and the small cracks in the corners of the room added to the antiquity. The carpet was old, and the small window in the living room opened onto a small yard with a few withered trees. The surrounding scenery was quite wild. Not many people passed by. However, I did not feel lonely. This apartment feels like a sanctuary to me. I am single and moved here for work. My new company is quite far from where I live, so I thought it would be the perfect place to start a new life. But after only a few days, I started to notice things were not right. At first, I thought they were just normal sounds that I didn't pay attention to, but gradually they became clear and undeniable. Every night, when the night fell and the dim street lights shone through the windows, I heard strange noises coming from all over the apartment. Soft footsteps, as if someone was walking around in the living room, even though I was the only one in the apartment. The footsteps usually sounded in the middle of the night when I was already in bed, but I didn't dare go out to check. I wondered if it was just the normal noises of an old house. But the feeling of unease grew every night. One night, after hearing those footsteps again, I decided to get up and check. I walked from the bedroom to the outside, taking every step carefully, so as not to make any noise. The apartment was so quiet that I could hear my own footsteps echoing in the silence. When I got to the living room, I turned on the lights. Everything was normal. There was no one but me. However, as soon as the lights were turned on, I noticed something strange. A chair in the living room, which I had moved to the corner of the room when I was packing, had now moved to the middle of the room. My mind began to wander. not understanding what was happening. I was sure that I had left the chair in a corner of the room and had not touched it. But now it was in a different place. I checked the entire apartment, but found nothing unusual. The walls were still cold, the windows were still closed, and there was no sign of any forced entry. Yet there was a strange feeling, as if someone was still there, hovering around me. I couldn't stop feeling uneasy, and it seemed like the apartment was making me feel more and more like I wasn't alone. A few nights later, I heard the noises again, but this time, it wasn't just footsteps. I heard a knock on the door, soft but steady, as if someone was standing outside. I got up to open the door, only to find an empty space, with no one there. The feeling of anxiety began to become unbearable. How could I explain these phenomena? Then one night, while I was sitting on the sofa, the light in the living room suddenly turned on, and then went out immediately for no reason. I thought it was a broken light, but when I tried to turn it back on, it didn't come on. Then I saw something strange in the dim light. A blurry figure standing near the window. I thought my eyes were failing, but no, the figure was still there, as if looking at me. I held my breath, trying to see more clearly, but the figure disappeared immediately when the light came back on. I couldn't explain what had just happened, only that I was haunted by something beyond my understanding. Day by day, the apartment seemed to change. Noises began to appear more frequently. From behind the walls, light footsteps, the sound of something being dragged. I tried to press my nose against the walls, listening closely to find the source of the noise. But there was nothing, just strange silence afterwards. I began to feel tired, couldn't sleep well, because I always felt like I was being watched. Every time I went to the bathroom, I felt someone standing behind me. Every time I turned on the light, the space became dim and cold. I started to try to learn about this apartment, and when I asked about its history, I received vague answers from the people around me. No one knew much about the apartment, except that it had a previous owner. But the previous owner had mysteriously disappeared. I couldn't help but think that there was something mysterious and gloomy hidden behind the walls of this apartment, something waiting to be discovered. Gradually, the strange phenomena in this apartment were no longer just footsteps, knocks, or shadowy figures. Every night, I heard increasingly clear noises, as if someone was trying to get close to me. This feeling of fear was no longer just a simple worry, but an unavoidable reality. This apartment, with all its mystery, was no longer a place of peace. It had become a place where I couldn't sleep, and I knew that something beyond my control was happening in this space. Every night, I felt like I was slowly becoming a part of it, a part that couldn't be left behind. Every night, I tried to forget the strange events in this apartment, but the more I tried to forget, the more clearly they appeared. That feeling, as if someone was always standing next to me, in the dark, watching me every second, making me unable to rest. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, not because of fear, but because of this inexplicable presence. One night, as I sat on the sofa, the dim light from the night lamp casting a thin strip of light, I suddenly heard a small noise coming from the hallway. I didn't think it was anything serious, just the wind, or maybe the old window wasn't closed tightly. But when the noise continued, I began to feel nervous. This time, it wasn't normal footsteps anymore, but a dragging sound, as if someone was dragging something heavy across the floor. I stood up, my palms sweaty. I didn't want to check, but part of me couldn't help it. My mind was filled with only one question. Is there anyone else in this apartment besides me? My footsteps echoed steadily, getting closer and closer to the hallway. As I stepped out of the bedroom, a strange coldness began to invade my body. The air in the hallway suddenly became thick, as if something was pressing down on this space. My steps were heavy, and the closer I got, the more clearly I could feel the cold radiating from the surrounding walls. As I approached the living room door, the nightlight suddenly went out. For a moment, the space around me was plunged into darkness, and I heard a whisper. The whisper was so soft that I had to listen carefully, to notice, as if someone was standing nearby, right behind me. But when I turned around, the room was empty. No one was there. A chill ran down my spine, making me shiver slightly. I returned to the bedroom, my feet hurriedly walking, but still unable to escape the feeling that someone was following me. My eyes were glued to the darkness in the room. I could not tear myself away from that gaze, a gaze that I could not explain. The shadows in the space seemed to move. Even though nothing had changed, I tried to breathe evenly, to calm myself. But the light from the night light suddenly turned on, this time brighter than usual, making me startled. The feeling of fear in me was like a strong electric current, making me unable to stand still. I moved closer to the lamp, looking at the reflections in that light, but could only see my own silhouette. Suddenly, a noise rang out from inside the living room. The sound of the drum was gentle but clear, as if someone was deliberately moving the furniture in the room. I could not stand still anymore. I had to check, even though I did not want to. With each step I took, I walked down the hallway, but the feeling of dread grew stronger. As I approached the sofa, I saw something inexplicable. The sofa, which I had been sitting on before, was now pushed to the middle of the room, as if someone had just sat down and stood up. I checked the room, this time sure to find an answer, but there was nothing unusual. When I returned to the bedroom, I looked in the mirror. I saw my reflection, but a shadow behind me was also reflected in the mirror. I turned around, but there was no one. This feeling of dread was indescribable, as if something was pulling me towards it, pulling me into a truth that I could not understand. I looked around, my eyes glued to the window, where dark clouds covered the moonlight, creating a dark picture. I listened to every little sound in the house, but there seemed to be nothing but my own breathing. The darkness was overwhelming, but I couldn't stop. It seemed like this apartment had a mysterious power, something that was holding me back, like a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. Everything seemed inexplicable. The noises, the movement of furniture, the flickering lights, all seemed to be pushing me into a quagmire with no way out. I tried calling a friend, but my phone suddenly died in the middle of the call. No signal, no way to contact anyone. The night became more and more silent, and I felt a mysterious presence in this apartment. I couldn't explain it, but I knew something was watching me, waiting for me to approach, something that I couldn't run away from. I stood there, eyes wide open, staring into the darkness. Just me in this old apartment, the space dark and quiet. Everything was deathly silent, but I knew Something was waiting. Something I couldn't know until it was too late. This apartment was no longer a place I could call home. Every night, a strange, inexplicable feeling gradually enveloped me. What was happening seemed more and more unusual, to the point where I could no longer distinguish between reality and illusion. But what I was certain of was that something invisible was watching me. I couldn't tell if what I saw was real or not. The uneasiness grew, and no matter how hard I tried to avoid it, I couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious phenomena that were happening in the apartment I was living in. One night, I was sitting in the living room, staring at the bedside lamp on the table, when suddenly the light started flickering. At first, I thought it was a broken lamp, but when I tried to check, the light turned on by itself, then turned off unnaturally. It wasn't a normal technical problem. The feeling that someone was controlling the light in this room became more and more obvious. Just like every night before, I heard a noise again. This time, it wasn't footsteps, nor was it a knock on the door. It was whispering. So soft, so close, yet so incomprehensible. The whispering came from behind the walls, as if someone was standing right in my room, but I couldn't see them. I stood up, my palms sweating. I didn't dare to move quickly, but I knew I had to check. As I walked down the hallway, the whispering came again, this time more clearly. I felt like there was a cold breath around my ears. Something was talking to me, but I couldn't hear it clearly. My eyes scanned every corner of the room, but there was nothing unusual. There was only the faint light from the nightlight, and the space was still strangely cold. But I couldn't ignore the strange feeling in my heart. Suddenly, I felt that something was wrong. I don't know if I'm imagining things, but there's a feeling like someone is standing in the dark, watching my every move. Suddenly, I heard a very clear noise coming from the bedroom. At first, I thought it was the wind, but when I opened the door, I saw something that made me freeze. My bed was no longer in its proper position. It was moved to one side, as if someone had just lain down on it and stood up. But there was only me and no one else in the room. This was inexplicable. My sense of confusion grew rapidly. I looked at the mirror on the wall, where I usually looked when I woke up. Tonight, the mirror reflected something strange. It wasn't me, but a shadowy figure, standing silently in the corner of the room. The figure didn't move, just stood still, as if waiting. I couldn't take my eyes off it. The shivers began to spread throughout my body, although I couldn't explain anything. But one thing I knew for sure, that figure was not mine. It was not a person, but something very real, very clear, something that should not exist in this room. I quickly turned around, locked the door, and walked down the hallway. The light from the night light fell on the floor, but this time I felt colder than ever. As I walked through the hallway, I noticed that the living room window was wide open, even though I had closed it tightly before going to bed. There was no wind, but the window was open as if someone had been there, quietly opening it without me knowing. The feeling of fear at this moment could no longer be contained. Every step I took felt like a heavy rock was being carried on my shoulders. I turned back, trying to hold the phone tightly in my hand, but when I looked at the screen, there was no signal. Everything became silent and heavy. The space around me seemed to be constricted, as if an invisible presence was holding me back. Suddenly, another sound rang out. The sound of something shattering, as if something heavy had fallen to the floor. I ran to the living room, looked at the floor, and saw a shattered mirror. But the strange thing was, I couldn't remember where I had put this mirror, and I had never seen it before. At this moment, I realized that I was stuck in a loop of inexplicable things. Everything was happening as if someone was controlling me, making it impossible for me to escape this obsession. I tried to calm down, but I couldn't. The whispers rang out again, clearer and closer than ever. And then, I noticed something more terrifying than anything before. My bedroom door, which had been tightly shut, was slowly opening. It wasn't the wind or whirlwind, but some invisible force was slowly pulling the door open. But when I walked closer, there was no one in the room. The room was empty. Only the bed was still there, in its original position. A strange feeling and anxiety enveloped me. I couldn't explain what was happening, but I knew that I couldn't continue living in this apartment. Story 6, Ghost in the Mirror. The first night I walked into this hotel, I felt something was wrong. There was a heavy silence that hung over the place, as if no one had been here for decades. The hotel was located deep in the woods, with no phone reception and no sign of the modern world. I knew immediately that I was being pulled into a strange place, where mysterious things could happen that I could not predict. I had come here to relax after a long trip, and this hotel, although old and worn, had a strange charm. The wooden walls were faded, the lights were dim, reflecting off the long winding corridors. The wooden stairs creaked under my feet as I climbed. I remember the feeling clearly, a sense of stillness, as if I were the only person left in the world. When I received the key from the receptionist, there was something strange in her gaze, as if she was trying to hide something, but I didn't think much of it. She just gently handed me the key and said, "Your room is 207 on the second floor. If you need anything, just call me." I smiled and thanked her, then carried my luggage up to my room. Room 207 was at the end of the hallway, almost isolated from the other rooms. I opened the door, and as soon as I entered, the space of the room made me feel like I had entered another time. The bed was simple, the bedding was thin, but still very clean. A rustic wooden table and a large mirror hung on the wall opposite the bed. Outside the window, the faint light of dusk filtered through the curtains, creating long shadows on the floor. I put my luggage down on the bed, breathing a sigh of relief. Although I was quite tired, after the long trip, I decided to take a bath to relax. The warm water poured over my body, making my tension gradually disappear. Everything became quiet in this small space. Only the sound of running water and the soft noises from the room remained. After finishing my shower, I returned to my room, changed my clothes, and decided to rest a bit. I lay down on the bed, closed my eyes, hoping to have a deep sleep after a long, tiring day. However, as I was about to fall asleep, a strange noise from the hallway caught my attention. The noise, soft and steady, as if someone was moving outside my door. I listened, but when I heard nothing more, I thought it might be the wind or some normal noise from the house. However, at that moment, a soft voice rang out in the quiet space. It was not the noise of anyone in the hotel, but a soft call, as if someone was calling my name. "Come here." My heart pounded. I got up, went out, and opened the door. The hallway was still quiet. No one in sight. I called out, "Is anyone out there?" But there was only silence. The long hallway was quiet. No one there. No one near the door. No sound. No sign of anyone here except me. I closed the door, trying to calm myself. I went back to bed, closed my eyes, but the anxiety still followed me. However, fatigue still prevented me from staying awake for too long. I tried to sleep, tried to dispel the uneasy feelings. And then, sleep came, but it was not a peaceful sleep. I dreamed of a strange scene. I was standing in a dark room, only a dim light flickering on the ceiling. I couldn't move. My body was stiff. I couldn't lift a finger. I felt scared, but there was nothing I could do. I could only stand still in the darkness. A vague figure was approaching me, so close that I could hear its footsteps, although I couldn't see its face clearly. A cold feeling spread throughout my body, and I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. While I tried to scream, not a single sound escaped my mouth. My body felt frozen. I couldn't move even a little. Then the figure got closer. Its eyes, a pair of pitch black eyes, stared at me, and I felt like they were piercing my mind. The feeling of paralysis and fear made it impossible for me to breathe. I wanted to wake up, to escape this nightmare, but I couldn't. All that remained was darkness and despair. When I woke up, my heart was still pounding. Sweat soaked my back. I sat up, looking around the room. Everything was quiet, but the air was still heavy. I knew that I wouldn't be able to fall back asleep easily. An uneasy feeling still lingered in the air, and I couldn't help but think that there was something unusual about this hotel. The feeling of dread wouldn't leave me. That bathroom door. I couldn't help but think about it. Perhaps it was just me who felt that strangeness. But I knew that I couldn't get rid of those feelings until I found out the truth. At this point, I could only hope that what I had just experienced was just a nightmare, and that it would all be over soon. Although I tried to calm myself down after the nightmare, a strange feeling lingered around me, as if someone was standing right behind me, watching my every move. I tried to push these thoughts away, but failed. The feeling became more and more pronounced, and I couldn't deny that the silence in this hotel was unbearably tense. I looked at the clock. 2:30 a.m. There was no way to go back to sleep. I got up and opened the window, hoping that the fresh air could dispel the heavy feeling in the room. The dim light of the moon shone through the trees outside the window, creating undulating shadows on the ground. Everything was strangely quiet. I heard the gentle rustling of the wind through the leaves, but this sound could not soothe the restlessness in my heart. Just as I was about to go back to bed, the dim light from the ceiling lamp suddenly flickered strangely. I stood still, my eyes glued to the lamp. The light flickered, flashing on and off, as if something was stirring in the air. Not just a broken bulb. This abnormality couldn't be a coincidence. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I walked closer to the bathroom door, where the light from the lamp was shining. The feeling of dread rose once again. At this moment, I couldn't control my emotions. An invisible force pulled me closer to the bathroom door. Thoughts of not going in there kept running through my head. But in the end, I opened the bathroom door. It was a dark, cold space, filled with the dampness of the wooden walls. The smell of mold and old soap wafted through the air. I shook my head, trying to calm myself. The bathroom light was also flickering, but this time, it couldn't make me forget the abnormality in this space. I stepped inside. My hand touched the sink, feeling cold. Suddenly, the light from the lamp went out. The room was plunged into thick darkness. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to control my breathing. Suddenly, a strange sound interrupted the silence. The sound of dripping water. But it wasn't from the faucet. This sound of water came from behind the large mirror hanging on the wall. I opened my eyes, staring at the mirror. In the darkness, I couldn't see my reflection clearly. Only the blurry images of the room behind. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the mirror. It wasn't mine. I stood still, not daring to move. A woman with long jet black hair stood right behind me in the mirror. Her eyes weren't looking at me, but seemed to be staring at a certain point in the room. She didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel her presence. I turned around, but there was no one behind me. I felt as if I had been invaded by something I couldn't explain. I didn't dare look at the mirror again. I hurried out of the bathroom, closed the door, and took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. However, the fear still wouldn't let me go. As soon as I got back to bed, I heard a strange noise from down the hall again. This time, it wasn't footsteps. It sounded like someone was dragging something heavy, scuffing across the wooden floor. I sat up in shock, my heart pounding. The noise couldn't have come from anyone else in the hotel. No one could move around in this hotel this late at night. I decided I couldn't sit still any longer. I opened the door and stepped outside, feeling anxious but also unable to contain my curiosity. The hallway was still quiet, but that rustling sound echoed from the end. I couldn't see clearly, but I felt the presence of something terrifying, as if it was waiting for me. Despite my fear, I couldn't turn back. I walked towards the sound, feeling as if an invisible force was pressing me closer. As I neared the end of the hallway, the dim light of the hallway lamps illuminated my face. But I couldn't see the room at the end. A cold feeling enveloped me. And then, I realized something strange. The door to my room, room 207, was no longer closed. It was slightly ajar, as if someone had opened it without making a sound. I stood there, my heart pounding like thunder. The air seemed to stop. I stood there, in the middle of the dark hallway, my heart pounding, each beat like a deafening knock in my ears. The door to room 207 was still open, just a little, but enough to keep me from taking my eyes off it. I could feel the tension in the air, as if everything was waiting for something to happen. The rustling sounds I had heard from down the hall were still ringing in my head, as if they were still there, right behind me, just a few steps away. I knew that I couldn't turn back. This feeling of an invisible force pushing me forward was undeniable. I couldn't stop. I took small steps toward the half-open door, and my footsteps seemed to grow heavier. Each step made me feel as if the ground beneath my feet was slipping, as if I were walking on air instead of floor. As I got closer, I felt a cold wind blowing from the room, making me shiver. I didn't dare look inside, but I could feel something watching me. The dark shadow inside the room became more and more visible in the dim light of the hallway lamp. I couldn't stop going. But part of me wanted to turn around, to run away from this place. I stood there, just a step away from the door, but the feeling of fear froze me in place. Suddenly, the door swung open completely, as if an invisible force from inside the room had pushed it open. I saw in the darkness a figure passing through the door, so fast that I couldn't tell what it was, but I knew for sure that it wasn't a person. It felt as if someone or something was waiting for me to enter, waiting for me to make another mistake. Standing there, I heard a very soft laugh echoing in the quiet space. It sounded like a distant echo, but it seemed to come from right behind me. I turned around, but saw no one. There were only dark shadows on the walls of the hallway, as if the shadows themselves were alive, moving, watching me. I didn't dare to look back at the door anymore. But as I turned away, I felt a cold breeze blowing from behind me, as if someone had just stood right behind me. Suddenly, I heard a rustling sound from inside the room. It sounded like someone was dragging something heavy across the floor. I couldn't stand there any longer. Too scared, I quickly turned away. But when I turned back, I found that the door was already closed. My limbs were weak. I didn't have the strength to think about anything anymore. I started running as if someone was chasing me. But as soon as I ran past the corner of the hallway, I heard footsteps behind me again. It sounded like someone was following me. Each step I took made the sound closer, clearer. The footsteps kept ringing, not slowing down at all. I turned back, only to see a blurry black shadow in the dark corner. I didn't dare to look closely, didn't dare to distinguish what it was. But I felt it coming, very close. And then I heard a small voice from within the darkness. "You won't escape." My heart stopped, fear rising like a wave. But before I could think of where to run, the black figure came so fast that I couldn't react. Everything around me suddenly went dark, as if everything was being swallowed up in a bottomless darkness. My gasping breaths mixed with the strange sounds around me. And then everything was silent. Story 7. Night of Horror at the Mental Hospital. It had been years since I last heard about the old mental hospital in the suburbs. The place, just an hour's drive from the city, had long been abandoned. No one remembered it anymore. Only the locals still occasionally told strange stories about it, as a warning to those who dared to enter. My group of friends and I had heard enough of those stories, and like any other group of young people, we never believed in the unexplainable. We decided to give it a try and see for ourselves. The bitter cold of the November night could not stop our curiosity. The hospital was deep in the woods, covered by dense vegetation and tall trees. As we approached, I could feel the unnatural silence that had enveloped the entire area. The deserted buildings stood tall, their roofs rotting, their windows broken, and their walls already leaking. The musty smell of time and abandonment hit my nose, forcing me to inhale deeply to get used to it. The last time this hospital was in operation was about 15 years ago, Jake, my best friend, said as he got out of the car. They closed after a very strange incident. A famous doctor disappeared without a trace. There were also rumors that some patients died under mysterious conditions. Jake's words only added to my suspense. Although I didn't believe in ghosts or strange stories, somehow, standing in front of this hospital, I felt that something unusual was waiting for me. There were 4 of us: me, Jake, Emily, and Mark. We walked through the large rusted gate where the sign Ashwood Psychiatric Hospital was still intact, though faded with time. A cold feeling enveloped everything. We walked inside, the light from the flashlight only illuminating a small part of the dark space. The air here seemed to freeze. Each step echoed as if breaking the deathly silence. The hospital door was completely destroyed, broken glass mixed together like unhealed wounds. I bent down, the flashlight illuminating the sharp shards of glass. Careful, I warned. We don't know who or what has taken over this place. Emily sneered. What are we looking for? Just an abandoned hospital? I said nothing, just followed them silently. Stepping inside, everything became even more gloomy. Long dark corridors, closed doors, all seemed abandoned, forgotten by time. The feeling of silence grew thicker and thicker, as if something was watching us from afar. Mark, who loved to challenge himself and attract attention, had an idea. Let's turn on a camera and see what happens. If there's a ghost, we'll catch it. We agreed, more out of excitement than fear. The camera was turned on, and I couldn't help but feel a shiver as the sound of the camera echoed in the suffocating silence. We began to walk through the rooms. Exam rooms, treatment rooms, waiting rooms, all had a strange loneliness. The hospital beds were empty. The old plastic chairs were still there, covered in dust. The air was stiff and stuffy, as if everything here was waiting for something to return. Suddenly, a sound came from the end of the hallway. A soft sound, like footsteps, but not ours. I turned, the light from my flashlight hitting the shattered walls, but saw nothing but pitch blackness. Did you hear that? Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mark shook his head. It must have been from somewhere. Maybe the wind blowing through the broken window. But I didn't think so. The footsteps were too clear to be wind. They seemed to be coming closer to us. I felt the air thicken, making it hard to breathe. My mind suddenly became hazy, as if something was intruding on my thoughts. A feeling I couldn't describe. Let's go, I said softly, trying not to let the fear show in my voice. We continued moving through the hallways, and then a sight made us all stop. The window at the end of the hallway was wide open, even though we had definitely closed it earlier. In the dim light, a shadowy figure stood outside the window. The figure had the shape of a person, but it was hard to make out who it was. A pale face, eyes that seemed blurred in the darkness. It stood there, motionless, just looking at us. Who is it? Emily whispered, but no one answered. Everything seemed frozen. We couldn't move. We all stood still, a terrible fear gripping us. Then, like an unconscious reflex, I pulled the group together. We need to get out now. As we turned and hurried toward the front door, another strange noise rang out. This time, it was a rumbling, as if something was chasing us. The air around me seemed to grow heavier, and I could feel the cold waves rolling in, numbing my limbs. We rushed outside, but when I looked back from the hospital window, I could clearly see a figure standing there, watching us. The figure didn't move, but I felt like it was waiting for us to come back. The next day, we checked the cameras. What we recorded was inexplicable. That scene was not created by any of us. But there was one thing I could never forget. The feeling of utter fear. As if we were not the only ones in that building. We left Ashwood Psychiatric Hospital early in the morning, but none of us could sleep. The strange feeling from the hospital still lingered, like inseparable ghosts. Last night, we had witnessed things that could not be explained, and as much as I wanted to deny it, I knew that what had happened was not the product of imagination or fear. On the way home, I could not shake off the image of the figure standing behind the hospital window. That look, cold, lifeless, seemed to haunt me, making me unable to forget. We did not turn back, just hurriedly ran outside. But I knew it was not the end. The next morning, I called Jake, Emily, and Mark. We all felt restless, unable to shake off the heaviness in our hearts. Something had happened last night, but none of us could explain it. We decided to go back to the hospital. "We can't let it end like this," Jake said, his voice still troubled. We gathered again that afternoon. The hospital was the same, standing silently in the woods, like a tomb of old, forgotten memories. The rotten doors, the water-soaked walls, all gave off a terrible chill. This time, none of us dared to enter without feeling afraid. "There's definitely something in there," Emily whispered, her eyes looking toward the hospital, her hands shaking. We couldn't explain it, but this time we decided to bring some video and audio equipment. I didn't believe in the supernatural, but the feeling last night really made me suspicious. We needed proof. We went back inside the hospital, our footsteps echoing in the long, empty hallways. The walls were stained yellow. The cracks on the floor seemed to prove that time had swallowed everything. The feeling of coldness was constant, but this time we did not rush, but took our time. We began to check the rooms that we had not explored last night. The clinic lay silent with abandoned beds, old pillows and blankets scattered on the floor. The treatment room was empty, only old medical equipment covered in dust. The air here seemed to stagnate, heavy, making it difficult for me to breathe. The strange thing was, when I looked at the broken windows, I saw that the darkness outside seemed darker than usual, and then a feeling of cold suddenly filled my body. I turned around, and we all felt something very different in this space. Suddenly, a sound rang out. A light sound, but clear enough for us to stop and listen. There was a rustling sound, like someone was shuffling down the hallway. We stopped, not daring to move. We looked at each other, eyes wide, trying to hear again. "It must be the wind," Mark tried to reassure me, but I didn't believe it. I could tell that the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the building, from somewhere close to us. The footsteps grew louder, as if someone was walking toward us. It felt like an invisible hand was tightening around my neck. I couldn't breathe. "Who is it?" I stammered, but no one answered. Jake picked up the camera, trying to start recording everything, but then it suddenly turned off again. Even though we were sure we had checked the batteries and equipment before entering. "The camera is dead," he said, his voice faltering. Emily turned, looking back at the hallway we had just passed, and then she let out a scream. A dark figure flashed by at the end of the hallway, fast. Our group jumped, our limbs stiffening. I stood still, my eyes glued to the darkness at the end of the hallway. "Is anyone there?" I called out. There was only silence. No one answered. But then, as we continued moving inside, we noticed something strange. The doors in the rooms that had been closed before now opened. The doors were empty, no one there. But why did they open by themselves? There was no explanation. We tried to stay calm and continued to explore the rooms inside. But the deeper we went into the hospital, the more I felt the presence of something not of this world. A small sound, like a whisper, passed by my ear, and I turned, looking around. There was nothing, just heavy silence, but I knew something was watching us. Then, a noise came from a room to our right. A sound like a chair being dragged across the floor. It couldn't have been natural. It was too obvious, too real. I shivered. "We have to leave," I said, but my voice was caught in my throat. I couldn't explain the feeling, as if something was forcing us to stay. At that moment, a loud noise came from above, like someone was banging on the ceiling. The group jumped. I looked up at the ceiling, where the cracks were more obvious than ever. Something was up there, moving, but we couldn't see it. "We have to go now," I said, not waiting for anyone to answer. I turned and started walking quickly toward the exit. As we neared the main door, a scream rang out from behind us. It was Emily. We turned to look, but saw only pitch black darkness. None of us dared to turn around to look for anything. "Let's go. Hurry!" Mark shouted, pulling Emily and me outside. The group ran through the dark hallways, our feet unable to stop, our hearts pounding in our chests. As we stepped outside, I raised my head to look toward the hospital building. A dark figure stood at the window upstairs, as if watching us. I couldn't breathe. The group of us didn't say anything, just silently got into the car. But in my heart, something wasn't over yet. That feeling still haunted me. None of us slept well for a week after our visit to Ashwood. I lay awake every night, staring at the pale white walls of my room, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that night had implanted in my mind. Images of the figure standing behind the window, the sound of unseen footsteps, and especially the cold feeling inside my body. All of it swirled around in my head, unable to escape. The feeling never left me for a second. There were nights when I woke up in the middle of the night, listening to the wind, or sometimes some noise I couldn't identify. Every time I turned to look at the room, I always thought someone was standing in the dark corner, staring at me. But it wasn't anyone. It definitely wasn't. "We have to go back," Jake said, his voice still hesitant. "We can't let what happened that night end like this. Something's still unfinished." I looked at him, feeling like something was urging me to agree, even though my mind was telling me never to go back there again. But the unease won out. The group of us sat in the living room, no one speaking for a few minutes, until Emily stood up, determined. "We'll go during the day," she said. "It's less dangerous, and I don't believe in those ghost stories anymore. But we need to be clear. I'm not sure if I could call it courage or foolishness, but I agreed." After getting ready, we drove to the hospital once more. The drive didn't take long, but the short time was enough to make me nervous. The closer we got to the hospital, the colder the air became, unlike any morning I'd ever felt before. Cold gusts of wind whipped through the car windows, as if to remind us of what was about to happen. As I stepped out of the car, I felt a chill run through my body. The landscape around us was silent. The trees were barren, their shadows long, like shadows of the past. The hospital had not changed. It still stood there, old and cold, like an untouched tomb. But this time, there was something different. Something was watching us, from behind, from the darkness. "Don't be afraid," I told myself, though I knew I couldn't convince myself. "We'll just go in and see. There's nothing to worry about." I didn't know who I was lying to, but as we approached the building, I felt the cold envelop me. The broken windows, the peeling walls, the broken door were exactly as we'd left them. Nothing had changed, and that only made me more afraid. The group stopped in front of the large door we'd passed through that night. I reached for the handle and pushed it open. The door opened, but the sound was like the groaning of something long forgotten. The four of us stepped inside, flashlights in hand, illuminating every dark corner of the room. The interior was exactly as it had been before, the only change being that dust had covered everything. Our footsteps echoed in the silence, and the sounds from outside the hospital seemed to be drowned out. There was only the sound of our footsteps, as if we were walking into a dead land. But then, as we went deeper inside, doors began to open strangely. The wards, the long corridors, all seemed to be welcoming us in. I felt an inexplicable urge, as if someone was calling us deeper into the darkness. "Something's not right," I heard Emily say. She stood still, her eyes fixed on an open door. "It must be the wind," Mark said, but his voice was a little shaky too. None of us seemed to dare deny what was happening. The footsteps continued, but this time we couldn't tell where they were coming from. They weren't ours. It was a light, steady step, as if someone was following behind, so close we could feel their breath. "Did you hear that?" Emily asked, her voice sounding frightened. I turned around, saying nothing. The group was silent, listening, and then a soft breathing sound, as if someone was standing nearby. The breathing was uneven, a little rushed. The air became heavier. I felt like an invisible hand was tightening around my neck, and I couldn't breathe. "Hurry up." I couldn't help myself, and started walking faster. I had a feeling that if we didn't hurry, we would never get out of here. And then I saw something flash in the darkness. A shadow, a shape standing still at the end of the hallway. I couldn't tell if it was a person or something else, but the cold feeling spread through my body. We turned around and ran towards the exit. Everything seemed to be spinning around us. I heard footsteps behind me, but when I turned around, there was no one. Only the shadow was still standing at the end of the hallway, staring at us. We ran out, not daring to stop, not daring to look back. When we got to the car, no one said anything. The group was silent, but in my heart, that feeling still could not be dispelled. That shadow, the shadow that I could not determine what it was, still haunted me. Story 8. Ghost Under the Stairs. I've always thought of myself as a strong person. Ever since I moved into this house, I've never felt afraid of anything. The house is located on the outskirts of the city, not too far from the center, but quite enough to relax after a long day of work. This is an old house built in the late 19th century, with exquisite architectural details and spacious spaces. The spiral staircase leads down to the basement, where I keep old furniture and things I no longer use. There aren't many people living in the house, except for me and occasionally friends who come over to visit. The quiet feeling usually makes me feel comfortable, but everything started to change after that night. That night, it rained lightly, the drops of water falling against the window, creating a shattering sound like a sigh of the night. I had just finished a work call and was about to go to bed when I suddenly heard a strange sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind or the creaking of the old house. But then the sound became clearer. It was footsteps. Footsteps from somewhere under the stairs, echoed up through the old wooden steps. The footsteps echoed, each step slow and strong, as if someone was moving up from below. A strange feeling rose in me, and I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, just the resonance of the rain. But then, the footsteps did not stop, but were accompanied by another sound. Crying, the crying, small but clear, as if someone was suffering, in pain. I stood still, my heart pounding. A shiver ran down my spine. I looked into the darkness of the stairs leading down to the basement, where the darkness was almost complete. No light. A basement door was ajar, like a waiting mouth. It's just the wind, I told myself, and walked out of the room. But as I approached the stairs, the crying came again, more clearly, this time. It wasn't the wind, it was my imagination. I felt a presence, something invisible but haunting. Strangely enough, I wasn't afraid. I just felt a strange urge, an urge that kept me from turning back, even though I knew there might be nothing. Still, I couldn't help myself. I walked toward the stairs. Every step made me feel closer to something, like an unforeseen danger. I stopped at the foot of the stairs. The space was still quiet, except for the steady sound of the rain. The crying still echoed, mixed with the wind. I heard it, but couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. Suddenly, I saw a faint light coming from under the stairs, through the crack in the basement door. A light that couldn't be there, because no one was down there at the moment. I took a deep breath and walked towards it. As I opened the door to the basement room, a cold feeling rushed over me. I walked in with the flashlight in my hand, the weak light just enough for me to see a few faint shadows of old objects. My mind still couldn't comprehend what was happening. And then I saw the mirror. It was an old mirror with a dark wooden frame standing in a corner of the room. It didn't fit in this space at all, like it had been there long before I moved in. I had never seen this mirror before, and I wondered why I had never noticed its presence. I walked towards the mirror. The surface was hazy, as if covered with a thick layer of dust. I wiped it gently, and an image gradually appeared in the mirror. It was the image of a woman. She stood still, motionless, her eyes looking straight at me. She wore a long, faded dress, her long hair falling over her shoulders, her face obscured by the dim light. A cold feeling seemed to permeate the room. I couldn't take my eyes off her. My eyes were glued to the mirror, but the more I looked, the more I felt drawn to it. It can't be, I whispered to myself, but I couldn't move. My breathing quickened. The light suddenly dimmed. Something inside me began to rise. An irresistible urge, a vague fear that I couldn't explain. Suddenly, the crying rang out again, clearer this time. But not from downstairs, but from within the mirror itself. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. But when I turned around, I saw nothing. The basement room was still empty. There was only that mirror, with the image of the woman standing silently. I felt as if my body had been kicked into a hole, completely still. The girl in the mirror was still standing there, but her eyes were different now. They were no longer lifeless like before. A terrible feeling enveloped me. The cries continued, growing louder, as if forcing me to look. My eyes blurred with strain. Then, in that moment, I realized that it was not me looking at her, but she was looking at me. The woman's eyes seemed to penetrate me, as if she wanted to say something that I couldn't hear. My body involuntarily took a few steps back, my hand leaving the mirror. But before I could turn around, another figure, faint and vague, appeared behind that woman. My heart stopped beating. I turned and ran quickly out of the basement. Each step echoed in the quiet night. I didn't dare to look back. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. I didn't know who that woman was, nor why I felt as if she was trying to warn me of something. But I was certain that there was something in this house, something I'd never known, waiting for me. After that night, I couldn't get the images I saw in the mirror out of my head. The sight of the woman standing silently, her deep black eyes and her crying echoed in my head for days. I tried not to think about it, but every time I went down the stairs, I felt like someone was watching me from behind. The feeling of being watched didn't leave me, even though I locked the basement room, not daring to look at the mirror again. The next day, I went back to work as usual, but I found myself unable to concentrate completely. Last night, when I left the house, I decided that I would find out more about the mirror. I couldn't just let things stop at this feeling of confusion. There were many strange things about this house, and I began to feel perhaps there was something lurking in there, something I had never noticed before. I decided to talk to the previous owner of the house. I called him, a middle-aged man with a hoarse voice. He chuckled and said that if I was having trouble with the mirror, just leave it alone and don't touch it. But I couldn't help but be curious. I asked him about the history of the house, about things I couldn't explain. "You just moved in, right?" he asked me back, sounding worried. It's best not to know too much about the house, especially about what happened. Just live normally and don't pay attention to it. I was a little surprised by his attitude. A previous owner seemed to be trying to hide something, but I couldn't give up. I felt like I had to find out the truth. After that call, I started spending more time observing the house, especially the area under the stairs. Every time I passed by there, I always felt a cold air, as if someone was standing there, even though I couldn't see anything. One afternoon, while sitting on the sofa, I heard a strange noise, the familiar creaking sound of the stairs. But this time, it wasn't just footsteps. It was breathing. Soft, steady breaths, as if someone was standing right behind me. It felt strange. I turned around, but there was no one. It was so quiet that I could hear the wind outside the window, but a part of me, the one that made me turn around, couldn't shake the thought that someone was somewhere in this house, watching me. And that's when I felt a chill spread through my body. At night I couldn't sleep. The light from the night light flickered erratically, sometimes bright, sometimes dim. The feeling of unease kept rising, pulling me into a spiral of anxiety. I couldn't stop thinking about the mirror and the woman in it. I decided to face it. That night, when everything was quiet, I took the flashlight and went down the stairs. The stairs were still the same. The darkness was thick, as if swallowing the whole house. I stood in front of the basement door again, holding the doorknob, but did not dare to open it. An invisible fear surrounded me. The feeling of fear was so great that I could hardly breathe. Only then did I realize that I was haunted by this house. Every corner of it contained inexplicable secrets. Finally, I opened the door. Suddenly, the light from the flashlight shone on the mirror, and I saw her again, the woman in the old mirror. She was still standing there, motionless, her deep eyes looking straight at me. But this time, I felt something different. A change in the atmosphere, as if something was about to happen. Suddenly, the mirror blurred, then became bright. The light from the mirror flashed, reflecting my face. But at that moment, I couldn't see myself clearly. The woman in the mirror seemed to be moving. Her eyes closed, then opened, and I felt a change in her gaze. She wasn't just a reflection. She seemed to be calling me, as if she wanted me to come closer. A sigh came from behind me. I turned around, but saw nothing. When I turned back to the mirror, the woman's image had disappeared. I stood there, unable to move, just looking at the mirror, which was now just a blurry picture. The crying rang out again, this time clearer, as if from the mirror itself. Another sigh rang out, mixing with the crying. My heart pounded harder. I couldn't understand what was happening. I looked down. My hands were shaking. The feeling of fear was so overwhelming that I couldn't stand any longer. I stepped back, and the mirror was suddenly dark, just like before I opened it. Nothing. No one. But I felt as if there was someone standing behind me. An inexplicable presence. I quickly closed the basement door, ran up the stairs, locked my door. The cold feeling still surrounded me. I knew I had seen something, but I didn't understand what it was. And I didn't dare think about what I felt. The cries still echoed in my head, as if they were chasing me from the darkness of the house. Everything suddenly became so confusing. I couldn't escape the haunting feeling that night left behind. Every morning when I woke up, I still felt tired. Not because of lack of sleep, but because those images kept repeating in my head, like a never-ending nightmare. Especially the woman in the mirror. She was always present in my dreams. Her deep eyes and her crying voice echoing from somewhere, as if trying to warn me of something. Even though I tried to forget, the feeling of being watched still couldn't let me go. The more I thought, the more I felt stuck. There were too many strange things in this house. Small details that seemed harmless became pieces of a dark story that I couldn't understand. I decided to find out the truth. I couldn't live in fear forever. After finding the book in the library, I was even more certain that I had to clarify everything. The woman in the mirror could be the one who died in this house. But why was she in the mirror? Was the mirror where she was imprisoned? And could the mirror be a door to the other world? Unable to let doubts haunt me, I decided to face the mirror once more. That night, when the house was quiet, I prepared myself. My hand trembled slightly as I held the flashlight. The weak light from the bright lamp shone down the stairs, making the darkness even darker and heavier. As I stood in front of the basement door, my heart pounded in my chest. I could feel the presence of something behind the door. A feeling like someone was waiting for me, wanting me to open the door. My lips were dry, but I decided to open it anyway. Inside, the mirror was still standing there, as if it had been waiting for me for a long time. The flashlight beam shone in, but this time, the mirror did not reflect back just a faint image. It was bright, strangely bright. I squinted, trying to make sense of the situation. And then, I saw her. She was no longer a blurry figure. The woman in the mirror was staring at me, her eyes no longer lifeless like before, but alive, full of emotion. Her silhouette slowly inched towards me, moving away from the mirror as if an invisible wave was pulling her away from it. My heart was pounding. I couldn't move. My eyes were wide open, but I still couldn't take my eyes off the mirror. Something strange was happening. The woman in the mirror seemed to be walking away from it. She walked slowly until I felt a cold breath on me. Suddenly, I felt a strong pull from behind. A cold, soft, yet irresistible hand gripped my arm. I turned around, but there was no one. It was just me in the mirror. A feeling of terror rose within me. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move, as if an invisible force had taken over my entire body. The woman in the mirror was still moving toward me, and each step she took was like an invisible call, forcing me to move closer. Then, at that moment, she was no longer just an image in the mirror. She stood before me, her eyes deep, cold, and haunting, as if she wanted to pull me into them. "Come with me," she whispered, her voice soft but powerful. "Don't be afraid. You're not alone. You'll be free." It felt like there was a powerful force pulling me toward the mirror. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. My arm felt like it was being held by an invisible hand, and I felt the force from within the mirror pulling me. I struggled, but I couldn't get away. The woman smiled, her eyes sparkling strangely, and she reached out to me as if to pull me into the mirror. I felt her cold hands touch me, and I knew that if I let her pull me, I would never come back. With a final effort, I pulled my hand back, curled my legs, and ran back outside. The darkness behind me was getting thicker and thicker, as if it wanted to swallow me. I turned my head, looked into the mirror again, and realized that the woman in there was more than just a ghost. She was an entity, something trying to pull me into her world. A world I couldn't understand. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut behind me. The cold feeling was still all over me. I didn't dare look back. My heart was pounding, as if it were going to jump out of my chest. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't live in this house anymore. It had changed me, and the mirror in the basement had opened a door I couldn't close. Story 9. Presence in the Darkness. Our new home is located in the suburbs, a quiet area away from the high-rise buildings. When we moved in, the feeling of a new beginning was wonderful. The house was a modern construction designed with all the amenities we could wish for. The rooms were spacious, with natural light everywhere. The large windows looked out onto the lush green garden, and from the bedroom, you could see the starry night sky, a scene I could only imagine in my dreams. My wife, Emily, had always dreamed of such a house, and I did everything to make it a reality. Our daughter, Lily, was also very excited when we moved in. She was only 4 years old, but she seemed very understanding and easily adapted to the new house. However, the first night in this house, everything started to change. After a long day of moving, Emily and I were exhausted, but Lily was still full of energy. I led her into the bedroom, sat her down on the bed, and read her a fairy tale. Lily loved magical stories, and she fell asleep as soon as I finished. I turned off the light and quietly left the room. But after a while, I heard Lily calling my name from inside the room. "Daddy, Daddy." I walked into her bedroom, opening the door slightly. Lily was sitting on the bed, eyes wide, staring into space. She smiled when she saw me. "I want you to sleep with me," Lily said softly, but something about it made me feel uneasy. She didn't seem scared, just a simple request like any other night. I sat down next to her bed and patted her. Are you okay? Does anything feel strange? Lily shook her head. No, Daddy. I just want you here. I heard someone in the corner, she said, pointing to a dark corner on the right side of the room. No one, honey. Daddy's always here with you, I replied, trying to reassure her. I ran my hand through her hair and smiled, then stood up and turned off the light. Lily closed her eyes, and I thought she was asleep, but not long after, I heard her talking again, this time in a whisper, as if she were talking to someone I couldn't see. Don't do that again, Auntie. Daddy'll be mad. You can't come into my room anymore. I stopped staring into the darkness of the room, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. Lily was still sitting on the bed, but she wasn't looking at me. Instead, she was staring at the empty space beside the small table by the window. Lily? I called softly, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. Daddy doesn't understand, Auntie. He won't listen to me, Lily whispered. But this time, there was a hint of fear in her voice. I walked over to the bed, bent down, and looked at Lily, a sense of unease rising in my heart. Lily, who are you talking to? I asked, trying to stay calm. She turned to look at me, her eyes wide with confusion. There's someone. She's standing there. She wants to play with me, Daddy. A chill ran down my spine. She didn't seem scared, but I could sense something strange in the air. I decided not to say anything more and just sat quietly by the bed, waiting for Lily to fall asleep again. But I couldn't stop thinking about my daughter's words. After Lily fell asleep, I returned to the living room where Emily was reading. Did you hear anything strange? I asked, trying to hide my anxiety. Emily raised her head, looking at me seriously. Do you feel uneasy about this house? I sat down next to her, trying to reassure her. Lily just said some strange things. Maybe she just imagined it. Emily put down the book and looked at me suspiciously. Are you sure? I also feel like there's something wrong with the atmosphere. I didn't say anything more, just looked out the window, where the house was already covered in darkness. Everything was still quiet, but the feeling of fear inside me couldn't be extinguished. Something was watching us, and I knew it wasn't something that could be explained by reason. That whole night, I couldn't sleep. Even though I tried to convince myself that it was all stress, the feeling of tension in this house became more and more obvious. Occasionally, I heard a slight movement in Lily's room, as if someone was moving around, and the whispering voice still echoed in my head. I got up and went into Lily's room again. She was fast asleep, but I couldn't take my eyes off the darkness in the room. This time, when I looked towards the corner of the room where Lily had pointed, I saw a shadowy figure standing there silently. It had no clear shape, but it was real. A cold feeling ran down my spine. I quickly turned around, left the room, and locked the door. My heart was pounding, and I knew that what we were facing was not a matter of imagination. The following days in the new house passed in an unusual silence. Although I tried to convince myself that everything was just a child's imagination, the anxiety could not leave me. Every night, when the night fell, a feeling of insecurity enveloped me. I no longer felt at peace in my own home. Lily still appeared cheerful and normal, but I could see that she had changed a little. She talked less. Her eyes were no longer as bright as before, and sometimes I caught her standing still, staring into a corner of the room without saying a word. That made me worried. But Emily, my wife, thought I was worrying too much. She told me to just trust my daughter and not let her imagination affect our family life. One night, while I was sitting in the living room reading a book, footsteps sounded from the hallway. I raised my head, listening carefully. There was a very light sound of footsteps, as if someone was walking in the darkness. I got up, went to the door, and opened it a crack. But the hallway was quite empty. "Lily, where are you?" I called softly. There was no answer. The strange feeling rose in me again. I walked into her room, where everything was as quiet as ever. Lily was lying on the bed, her face calm, but her eyes were still open, staring at the ceiling. I called her name again, but this time, Lily did not answer. Instead, she turned her head to me, her eyes blank and cold. "You don't understand, Dad," Lily said in a low voice, not a child's voice. It sounded as if someone else was speaking for her. "Why did you say that?" I asked, feeling a vague fear spread through me. "She told you not to come into my room." "She said you were gone, just like last time," Lily replied, her eyes still fixed on the ceiling. A cold feeling rose within me. I remembered the nights before, when she had talked to someone in the dark. But this time, Lily's story seemed much more serious. I felt like there was something lurking in this house, an unexplainable presence. I looked into my daughter's eyes, searching for some sign that she was just playing, but Lily's eyes were anything but innocent. They were the eyes of someone looking into another world, where there were things I couldn't see. I sat down gently on the bed, trying to reassure her. "Can I tell you about her, Lily?" I asked, my voice soft, but my heart filled with worry. "She doesn't like you, Dad," Lily whispered, clutching the blanket. "Who is she? Can you show me?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Lily pointed to the dark corner of the room, where the old armchair we hadn't moved yet was. "She's sitting there," Lily replied, but her eyes weren't looking at it. I turned around, my anxiety growing. The room was quiet, nothing out of the ordinary, but I felt an inexplicable pressure, as if someone was watching me from the shadows. I stood up and walked toward the corner where Lily had pointed. Everything was quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with this house. I didn't say anything more, just gently picked Lily up and tucked her into bed. "Daddy will always be here for you," I whispered, though I couldn't convince myself of it. When I returned to the living room, Emily was sitting on the couch, reading a book as usual. She looked at me and smiled. "Are you okay?" Emily asked, her voice soft. "I'm not sure." Lily was talking to someone in the room. "She seemed scared," I replied, still feeling uneasy. Lily was just imagining things. She's easily frightened and has a vivid imagination. "You shouldn't worry too much," Emily said, still calm, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The feeling of dread clung to me, like a ghost I couldn't shake. A child as young as Lily couldn't think of such things on her own, let alone talk to unreal entities. Was I just being too anxious, or was something really happening in this house? That night, when everything was quiet, I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was standing right next to my bed, silently watching me. I opened my eyes, but there was no one. Yet that presence didn't leave. It felt like I was being watched, but there was no sign that anyone was nearby. Late in the night, noises came from Lily's room again. Not footsteps, but whispers, as if someone was talking to her. I stood up and walked toward my daughter's room, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was ajar. and I saw Lily sitting on the bed, eyes wide open, staring into space. There was no one else in the room. She was talking to herself. "Who are you talking to, Lily?" I asked, my voice trembling. Lily turned to look at me, her eyes still empty. She said Daddy won't protect me anymore. She'll come and take me away. She said, her voice soft but filled with fear. I stepped closer to the bed, but something held me back. The feeling, a feeling I had never felt before, kept me from moving forward. My mind was spinning. An indescribable anxiety was taking over me. She was no longer my daughter, but a child, drawn into another world filled with inexplicable entities. "Daddy will always be here for you," I said, trying to stay grounded. But inside, I was no longer so sure. Something dark was waiting for us in this house. And I didn't know how I could protect my daughter when that presence grew stronger. The night dragged on like a never-ending nightmare. Every sound in the house seemed to grow louder. Every gust of wind blowing through the cracks in the windows sounded like a whisper from the other world. I couldn't sleep, couldn't find peace in the house I once loved. Fear rolled over me like a wave crashing against the shore. Before the morning light could penetrate the cracks in the windows, I woke up, cold sweat on my forehead. I sat up, trying to take deep breaths to dispel the feeling of fear weighing down on my chest. But there was something in the air that made it impossible for me to breathe. An invisible force pulled me to Lily's room, where fear was always present. When I entered my daughter's room, I could hardly believe my eyes. The room was dark, not a single light coming in from outside. Lily was no longer in bed. The window was wide open, letting in the cold wind. Her hair fluttered in the air, as if someone was playing with it. I took a deep breath and called out, "Lily," but there was no answer. The room was filled with dead silence. At this moment, my eyes accidentally swept over the armchair that Lily had pointed out the day before. And as soon as I looked there, I saw a figure sitting silently, motionless, only its bright eyes staring at me. Those eyes were not Lily's. A chill enveloped me. I couldn't breathe. I took a step back, but the figure still didn't move. It felt like an invisible hand was squeezing my throat. My heart was pounding, each beat tearing apart the silence that was enveloping me. "Let her go," I shouted, but my voice was stuck in my throat. In response, there was a low, creepy laugh from the darkness. "Dad, you can't protect me," the voice said, soft but haunting. "Dad, you can't save me. She's here." Before I could understand what was happening, I turned around. But everything around me suddenly disappeared. The room disappeared, and I found myself standing in a pitch-black space. No light, no silhouettes. There was only the sound of my own breathing and the cold laughter that was gradually echoing from all sides. "Dad, you won't be able to stop her?" Lily's voice rang out from somewhere, unclear, as if she were far away in another world. I collapsed, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was about to burst. I looked around, and then a huge, distorted shadow stepped out of the darkness. It was a creature, an inhuman entity, with eyes that burned like burning flames. It walked slowly, but each step made me feel like my heart was being sucked into a bottomless pit. Those eyes were those of an ancient, vengeful, powerful creature. "She's mine," it whispered into the silence. "And you can't keep her." I looked at Lily, who stood still, her gaze drawn to the creature. She was no longer my daughter. There was only the shadow of a child being dragged into the darkness, into a world I could not enter. No, I screamed, running toward her, but my body felt as if it was being held back by an invisible force. I couldn't move, couldn't save Lily. The whispers rang out again, insistent, like blades piercing my mind. She's mine now. A chill swept over me, and then everything went dark. A great shadow fell, swallowing everything, and I was left alone, with the creature's soft laughter echoing in my mind. Lily was gone. The whole house was silent, as if nothing had happened. But I knew there was something in this house, something I couldn't understand. Something dark was waiting, and I couldn't run from it. The whole world had been swallowed by darkness. Story 10. Soul in the Abandoned Villa. I'm not a person who is easily haunted by ghost stories. I've always been a rational person, a construction worker, and for me, everything has a scientific reason. However, when I stepped into that mansion, something changed. The mansion was located in Beverly Hills, an area known for its luxurious, magnificent houses. But this mansion was different. It was abandoned, covered in dust and weeds growing around it, as if trying to hide a dark past. Everyone in the area avoided talking about it, and I had heard many stories of strange events that had happened there. But I never believed them. I received a call from a potential client. They asked me to come and survey the mansion again, to give them a quote for renovation. It had been a long time since I had the opportunity to work on such a big project, so I did not hesitate to accept. When I arrived, the mansion appeared before me, old but still exuding the beauty of its heyday. The red roof, large wooden windows, and imposing stone walls all made for a truly captivating appearance. I walked through the main door without needing to ring the bell. Everything inside the house was silent. The old paintings hanging on the walls were faded. The fabric sofas were worn, and the chandeliers seemed to have stopped shining long ago. My steps echoed in the quiet space. My feet felt heavy, as if they were being pulled down. This space had a strange, indescribable feeling, as if something was watching me from the darkness. I walked quickly to the living room, where there were large windows facing the sea. The hazy seascape in the distance was captivating, but I couldn't help but feel a chill in the air. This feeling was not due to the weather, but rather something invisible, as if this house had its own soul. Suddenly, I heard a laugh. It was a laugh that echoed in the quiet space, as if someone was standing right behind me. I turned around, but saw no one. There were only long shadows from the windows and an eerily empty space. My heart beat a little faster, but I reassured myself that it was just the wind, or maybe the sound of the house breathing. I continued my work, but the laughter still lingered in my head. I walked into the dining room, where there was a large wooden table, faded with dust. The chairs around the table were no longer used, and a heavy chandelier hung from the ceiling. But the light from it was no longer as strong as before. As I bent down to look at some old documents on the table, the laughter rang out again, this time more clearly, almost right behind me. I straightened up, my heart pounding. I must be hearing things, I told myself, and turned around to look for the source of the sound. But this time, I saw no one, only faint shadows from the windows and an eerie silence. I took a deep breath and stepped outside to the area outside the villa. This time, I hoped to find some fresh air, but the laughter still echoed in my head. I started looking around, feeling like someone was watching me, from the empty windows, from the shadows in the distance. As I was wandering around the villa, I came across a small plaque attached to the wall next to the main door. It had faded over time, but I could still read it. Accident occurred in 1964. The Dwyer family disappeared for unknown reasons. The mansion was then abandoned. I stood silently looking at the sign. Dwyer? I had heard that name somewhere before. A curiosity arose in me, and I decided to go back into the mansion to find out more. I found some old documents in a small cabinet in the study. The papers were yellowed, torn, and faded with time. One of them had a note about a fatal car accident involving the Dwyer family. The accident happened on a rainy night, and since then, the mansion had been abandoned. There was no clear explanation, just short lines about a strange disappearance. A disappearance that no one could explain. I wondered if the laughter I heard was related to this story. Suddenly, a strong wind blew through the window, making the curtains flutter, and I felt a chill down my spine. But at this moment, the strangest thing was not the wind, but the soft footsteps behind me. I turned around quickly but still saw no one. However, the footsteps did not stop. It seemed to be getting closer to me. A heavy feeling filled the air, as if someone was walking closer, silently, silently, as if waiting for me to realize something terrible. I hurriedly stepped outside, unable to bear it any longer. But when I turned back to look at the main door of the villa, I saw the silhouette of a man standing there, half transparent in the faint light from the lamps outside. Outside, the man smiled, a smile I could never forget. The laughter of a dead man. I couldn't take my eyes off the man, even though I knew I shouldn't look for long. But in that moment, I just stood there, mesmerized by that creepy smile. I couldn't forget the look of that man. His smile still echoed in my mind. Even though I tried to avoid it, to push away the strange feeling, a part of me still couldn't shake off what had happened at that abandoned villa. When I stepped outside, I took one last look back at the house. The large windows facing me were still dark, as if nothing had changed. But the strange feeling still haunted me. I'm not a weak person, not someone who is easily lost in supernatural or spiritual stories. I'm a practical person, living my own life. But that villa, and especially the shadow I saw, made me unable to dispel the cold feeling that was covering my mind. That night I couldn't sleep. Those footsteps, those laughter kept repeating in my head, like an undeniable obsession. The next morning, I returned to the mansion, not for work this time, but to learn more about what had happened here. The mansion, though old and abandoned, still contained traces of glorious period. I decided to find out more about the Dwyer family, about the accident, and about why the house was abandoned. I started from the study, where I had found the old documents. This time, I did not rush like before. I went through each room, each hallway, wondering if anyone had ever walked through this place. The cold feeling still did not leave me. The whole mansion was silent. Only the sound of my footsteps echoed in the quiet space. Once again, as I walked through the hallway, I heard laughter. But this time, the sound was no longer echoing from behind me, but from in front, from a room deep in the house. Strangely, The sound was not just a normal laugh, but a painful laugh, as if someone was struggling in pain. I stood still, my heart tightening. Every step I took seemed to be an effort to continue. I walked towards the room where the laughter came from, my hand lightly touching the doorknob. When I opened the door and entered, I was overwhelmed by the scene before me. That living room, where I had walked through before, now had a figure standing silently in the corner. It was that man. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down, but my limbs felt as if they had no strength left. The man was still standing there, looking at me. This time, he was not laughing anymore, but his empty eyes looked at me as if he wanted to say something. Not through words, but through that gloomy look. I turned around, hurriedly leaving the room, but as I stepped through the door, I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder. I turned around, my heart pounding. No one was there. I couldn't explain how I felt at that moment. I felt as if something was watching me. Every step, every move I made. It wasn't the feeling of an abandoned house, but of something resentful and haunting. I decided to leave the mansion. I didn't want to stay another minute. When I stepped outside, I looked back one last time, and then I saw a figure standing on the second floor, looking down. I couldn't see the person's face clearly, but I felt something familiar, as if they were waiting for me. I left in a hurry, but the cold feeling still followed me. I drove out of Beverly Hills and didn't dare look back, but it wasn't over yet. The next day, I received a call. The man's voice rang out over the phone, startling me. "Thank you for coming back, but you don't know everything about us." The voice was soft but full of menace. I couldn't say a word. I just kept quiet. The next day, I received an envelope delivered to my house. There was no sender's name, just an old photo, a black and white photo of the Dwyer family. In the photo, they were all smiling, looking happy. But the strange thing was that behind them, in the darkness, there was a blurry image of a man standing upright, his empty eyes staring straight into the camera. I couldn't stop. I had to find the truth. I returned to the mansion, this time not to survey or work. I came to search for what had been buried in the past. While I was rummaging through old documents in the study, I suddenly noticed something strange. A small door that I had never noticed before, deep in the room. The door was unlocked, and when I entered, I saw a spiral staircase leading underground. I took the flashlight and walked down, my heart pounding. The musty smell and cold air enveloped me. The mossy walls and cold stone floor made me shiver. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw a dark room with only an old wooden table in the corner. On the table, there was a small wooden box. I approached and opened the lid. Inside were old photos of the Dwyer family. But what stunned me was a single photo. There was a man standing in the corner of the room, staring at the camera. It was the man I saw in the villa. Before I could scream, I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder again. At this moment, I understood that I could not escape this place. The cold feeling on my shoulder was not something I would forget easily. My hands were shaking, but not from cold, but from a fear that I could not explain. For the first time in my life, I felt like an outsider in a story I had never wanted to be a part of. The cold hand slowly left my shoulder, and I turned around, my heart pounding, as if it were trying to jump out of my chest. Behind me, There was nothing but darkness and the mossy walls of the small room. But the feeling of being watched, of being surrounded, did not go away. It only grew thicker, heavier, and there was something indescribable lurking in this space. I gasped, my eyes darting around, but there was only darkness and dusty, dark corners. I could not stay here any longer. I needed to get out. I needed to escape this house, no matter what. But when I turned around, I saw the wooden box I had opened earlier. It wasn't where I'd left it. I stepped closer, my hand shaking as I touched the lid. A strange feeling came over me, as if someone was standing next to me, watching my every move. When I opened the lid, I saw an old piece of paper inside. The paper was yellowed. The words on it had faded with time, but I could still read some of it. It was a story about a family, about death and revenge. The story was about a man named Wire, who died in an accident that no one could explain. But the strange thing was that it wasn't just about his death. The story was also about a spirit, a ghost that kept returning to this mansion, waiting to clarify something that no one seemed to know. After reading the paper, I felt like I had opened a door that I couldn't close. Everything became hazy, as if I were in a game when no one had told me the rules. Dwyer's spirit might be haunting the mansion, but why me? Why was I drawn into this? I didn't have time to think any further. Suddenly, a laugh filled the air, not from behind me this time, but from all around me. The laughter was unlike any I had ever heard. It was dark and painful, as if someone was suffering from a great and inescapable pain. The laughter seemed to grow louder, and I couldn't escape it. The feeling of fear and tension made me unable to stand. I ran out of the room into the hallway, and at this point, I no longer knew where I was going. I only knew that I needed to get out as fast as possible. But the laughter still followed me, echoing in my head. I rushed into the nearby room, hoping to find an exit. But strangely enough, when I opened the door, I found myself in another room. This feeling was very strange. It wasn't like I was lost, but like I was being taken somewhere else, somewhere with no way out. I turned around, and this time, there was no sign of the man in the room. But I felt like someone was there, standing right in front of me. Another laugh, but this time it wasn't just one. It echoed throughout the room, as if thousands of souls were laughing at the same time, and I was their target. I couldn't take it anymore. Run. Running was the only way. I pushed the door open, dashing out into the hallway, but this time I saw someone standing at the end of the hallway. A blurry figure, hard to distinguish clearly, but there was something very familiar about the way they stood, as if they were waiting for me. "You can't leave." The voice echoed in the silence, and I realized it was the voice of the man I had met before. I didn't dare to look back. I only knew that the more I ran, the closer the figure got. It felt as if something very large, very powerful, was invading me, forcing me into a corner. When I turned back again, the figure had disappeared. There was no one standing there. There were only shadows and a silent villa. I knew I couldn't stay any longer. I rushed out of the house, feeling as if I was running away from the very soul of this villa. When I stepped outside, I didn't look back. But I knew that I hadn't left it completely. I just couldn't explain why. The next day, I went to a friend, a paranormal researcher, hoping he could help me decipher what I had experienced. He listened to my story and said nothing, just a moment of silence. Then he looked into my eyes and said, "That mansion is not just a ghost. It is a place of pain, loss, unresolved grievances. The man named Dwyer was not the only one who died there. And you may have awakened something that will not leave you alone." He paused, his eyes turning cold. "My advice? Don't come back. But I know I will have to return, even though I don't want to, because I can't escape it. That mansion, the laughter of the dead souls, will forever haunt me."